wastewater, and then it goes down from there. There are some other projects in there. That's neighborhoods, parking, municipal court, fleet, IT or innovation and tech services. That's our IT department. And then, of course, facilities management. As a comprehensive plan amendment, Spokane Municipal Codes Chapter 17G tells us what we should consider, how we should process this. This is the same set of criteria and process that you see me bring you every year for all of the private applications. In this case, it's 17G 020 030 tells you the criteria that you should consider when you're considering a comprehensive plan amendment. The staff report that was issued last week that was sent to you outlines each one of those individual criteria and the relationship of this project to those criteria. As an implementation action of the comprehensive plan itself, the CIP is generally consistent. My recommendation, my analysis that's in the staff report shows that it does meet those criteria. We also received 2 agency comments. Those were included in the staff report, one from STA, which has been forwarded to Integrated Capital Management so they can fold their requests into the individual projects as they are designed and developed. Another one from the Spokane tribe. I almost said the Kalispell tribe. That's what happens when you work for them for 4 years. They get stuck in your head. The Spokane tribe provided the same comment that we generally get, which is this is the ancestral lands of the Spokane people. There are things that should be done to make sure that inadvertent discovery is handled properly and that analysis is done before projects are developed to make sure that those resources are there. Just as a side note, we have a stipulation in the municipal code that those things happen before physical development. So it's already covered. Randy Amerson, really nice guy. It's nice that he shares that information with us every time, but it is already addressed in our municipal code. And then public comments. We did receive several public comments. They were at in the last appendix or last exhibit in my staff report. They were all related to Fire Station 5, I believe it was, in Latah Valley. So I've included those for you as well. That particular project is in the CIP as an unfunded project. Not because it's not necessary, but because there wasn't adequate funds at this time to identify. So you have seen all of the agency and public comments. Unlike most years, I didn't get any late ones to give you, so those are the ones. And then as per usual, a comprehensive plan amendment, Plan Commission is asked to make a recommendation to City Council. City Council will make the final approval. Your recommendation can take one of 3 forms. You can recommend that it be approved. You can recommend it be approved with changes, or you can recommend that it be denied. If it is denied, we do ask that you give us some input as to which criteria you feel it did not meet. Generally, that's the reason for denial, is that it didn't meet a criteria in the 17G 020. So. That's it for me. I'm happy to answer any questions you have. Just as a reminder or as a heads up to everybody, once you have made your recommendation, it will go to City Council for a study session, I believe, on the 19th. It's also going to be in their committee meeting on Monday afternoon. So the council process is beginning very quickly, but this is definitely the time if you have any questions for me. Yes, sir.
Just to clarify, I had asked this once before in a workshop, but there's no provisions for any homeless shelter purchases are in this capital budget. Is that correct?
I don't believe they are. Is that correct? Yeah. So there isn't a purchase of a shelter in this CIP. If funding was identified in the future or in the budgeting process, it would have to be added to the CIP.
Then just a comment, then I'm going to vote against the CIP because our most pressing need is not being addressed. And to me, I don't want to be a rubber stamp for a capital budget process that ignores one of the biggest issues. And with the existing shelter, there was a purchase option, but it turned out not to be viable, as I understand it. And since that hasn't worked out, it seems like we should be pursuing other alternatives. And the nature of capital budgets is you have to make trade-offs and prioritize A versus B versus C. And to me, this is one of the highest priorities, and to not have it be reflected in the capital budget is a concern for me personally.
Great. Thank you. All right. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you. With that, I will entertain a motion to begin deliberation.
I'd move that we recommend the 2024 to
Point of
2029.
order.
Oh,
Are we going to take testimony?
oh, is there any public?
Thank you.
Thank you. At this point, we will take public testimony. Thank you. It's been a while. If there is any public testimony, Ryan, you didn't provide any.
No one signed up.
No one signed up. Would anyone like to make any public testimony, either here in chambers or online? Okay, hearing none, I will close public comment. Thank you, Commissioner Byeruther. And now I will entertain a motion to, yes, really, to proceed.
I move that we recommend the 2024 to 2029 citywide capital improvement plan as proposed by staff.
I second it.
Wow. Thank you, Commissioner Patterson and Commissioner
Weir?
Winger. Man, I am having a tough day today. With that, let's begin with deliberations. I guess one thing I would like to discuss is Firehouse 5. It has been a longstanding issue, and the fact that we had public comment that came in written comment, including a retired fire captain that lives in that area, recognizing it's been a problem for multiple decades, that they have a temporary firehouse there that's just a re-provisioned single-family home. Anyway, and I'm not suggesting that we force the funding forward, but I'm just thinking that making some sort of recommendation to City Council to see if they can find some sort of mechanism to fund it. I was just reading in the paper this morning about the cap and trade program at the state level that could be used for environmental impact issues. And with climate change impacting fire suppression issues within our area, perhaps there might be some state funding options that the city might be able to engage with. And so, I don't know. I just think it might be a good thing to include a recommendation to try to find funding in the 2024 fiscal year for that project.
Did you want to make a?
Plan Commission President, can I just get a
Yeah.
clarification for staff's benefit? So there is, the capital facilities plan does include the fire station. So is your concern that there's no fire station in the plan, or just that,
No.
just that
My
funding
concern is
through the
that
budget
there is
process
no-
needs to be,
My concern, it is an unfunded project.
okay.
And that ideally, the city should be able to find a mechanism to fund that project for 2024.
Thanks, just wanted to make sure that was clear.
So I would make a recommendation to recommend to City Council and the administration to work to find funding for the firehouse station number 5 in the 2024 fiscal year.
Is that a motion?
That is a motion.
I will second the motion.
Thank you, Commissioner Vink. I made a motion, right?
There's a motion on the table.
As an amendment.
It's an amendment.
Okay.
It's all the unspoken things.
Just a question, is it, making a motion to make a recommendation like that, I guess I hear from staff, is that throw off an equation somewhere that there already is a balance in the, we simply adding something like that isn't allowed or in the process. Does that make sense?
I'm not suggesting making a modification to the CIP.
So it's really
It's just a recommendation for them to work to identify funding
more of
sources.
a commentary
Yeah.
note from the, so how would that be presented in the findings of fact that,
Well, that's what I'm kind of wondering about. I think, I guess my concern is that we're getting outside of Plan Commission's scope a little bit to be delving into budget issues. But I think the capital facilities plan does indicate, whether funding is available for certain projects. And so maybe it's appropriate to register concern about that, but maybe not go to the level of suggesting, giving any guidance on the budgetary process or anything.
Not solving the problem, he's just recommending an action.
Well, I mean, the basis is that if you look at capital facilities and are we outside of the level of service requirements for health and safety within that area because we are lacking a permanent fire station in an area. And so to me, it ties specifically right back to the comprehensive plan, which is why we're reviewing this in the first place. Go with Commissioner Winger first.
I agree. It is part of our comprehensive plan as part of public safety.
Commissioner Byerther.
so I'm not opposed to it, I'm just concerned about process. Is there a way, if that is a concern of the commission, that it's expressed more as to a concern of, to check consistency with something specific in the comprehensive plan? Flag it, rather than recommending an answer? I think then I could support the commentary. Because our role is to advise on consistency.
Right. I'm trying to think of how I can rephrase that. Let me withdraw my motion and make a new motion or a new amendment to revise this.
Second or withdraw there? Second.
I move to include in the findings of fact Plan Commission's concern with regards to comprehensive plan consistency for capital facilities for the lack of fire safety within the Latah Valley area and to identify a mechanism for building a permanent fire station in that area.
Can I make a suggestion here? I don't know that it's been demonstrated, certainly not before Plan Commission, that we're not meeting the level of service in that neighborhood based on the comprehensive plan level of service that's established. So I'm a little hesitant about including an assertion that we're below some kind of standard for fire safety. I think it's fair to express concern about the funding for the fire station and, encouragement to make sure that gets funded, but
Well, I guess we could let the area burn down first and then say we aren't compliant.
yeah, I don't
mean, a
I don't think
fire-
it's accurate to say we're not meeting our
Well,
level of
except
service
we have a
standards, so-
retired fire station captain saying that we are out of compliance in that area.
Okay, he's a
From
retired
Spokane
fire
Fire
captain.
Department.
I guess I just want to add that although we weren't presented with that information, we actually weren't presented with information about
To
the
the
level
contrary.
of service at all as to whether we were in compliance or were there any concerns. We were just given the assumption, or we were just led to assume that the presentation was in compliance.
And
I have a motion on the table. Does someone want to second it?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Commissioner Winger.
I agree. We don't know whether it's in or not, but what we're doing as a group is questioning.
Commissioner Shook?
Thank you. I wonder if we could put this on our agenda to discuss it during one of our work projects? Or is this something you want to make sure is addressed now?
This would be the only time that Plan Commission ever has an opportunity to look at this is when we're doing the capital improvement program, which is just a once-a-year type of scenario. We wouldn't look at individual facilities over the course of the year. So I don't think it could be discussed in the work program.
I think, again, I could support this if it was just simplified and said, can we, the Plan Commission has concerns about, to check on consistency, and then the staff can then present to City Council that the Plan Commission flagged this, staff can give a staff recommendation on that issue, and then I think we could be comfortable, in my opinion, on that. And I think that also applies to, potentially, we could support the package and then express concern about consistency of any issue or two issues, so forth.
Do you have a better way to phrase it?
I was just going to ask.
I think I would have cut you off halfway through your motion and said, after consistency, period. Yeah.
Do we
If
remember what
that
you
help-
said now?
Yeah, I know.
Because, but you know what I mean? I think then the motion led into a specific,
Project instead of just level of service
Yeah.
concern?
thank you.
So we've got a lawyer coming.
Jim Richmond here from City Attorney's Office. If I could, I'm a little concerned about pushing a motion of this nature forward. It sounds a little speculative, as though we're relying on hearsay that somebody heard in some other forum. And I think statements of that nature, we need to be careful about making those kinds of statements on the record. So that would be a caution.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Could it be phrased in such a way to say it needs some exploration, so there's not anything said definitively, but the question has been raised, and it seems like that would be legitimate to do, would it not? Or did you?
Okay, I'm going to try one more time. I withdraw my motion.
And the seconder has to withdraw.
I move to include in the findings of fact that Plan Commission expresses its concern with regards to fire service within the Latah Valley area and recommends further exploration.
For consistency.
For consistency with the comprehensive plan.
I'm helping out here.
Todd, what do you think?
It's getting simpler. Yes, but that would be an intent, that just express concern about consistency and don't overreach on scope.
Do we have a second so we can discuss it?
I second. Can I ask a question before the second?
No.
No, okay, then I second.
Thank you, Commissioner Britt. Okay, go ahead.
What does the secretary think about the current question?
About what part of it?
His, motion.
I think the one issue I might have is using the word concern. I think encouraging further exploration seems fine. I think as Mr. Richmond has expressed, there's, potential issues with making too strong a statement about the situations. But I think expressing a desire for further exploration seems appropriate.
I'm afraid I just don't know enough about the subject to kind of weigh in on the dais. Yeah.
Mr. President, was the source of the information that you read in a public-facing mechanism, newspaper?
Public comment.
Public comment. And this has been expressed multiple years.
Yes.
I think pretty much ever since I've been involved, it has come up repeatedly. I remember as being on community assembly that the neighborhood councils in that area expressed concern with regards with the lack of permanent fire protection down in that area. And it was at that point where they created the temporary firehouse as a kind of a stopgap measure. So it has gone on for a long time.
Yes.
This is not the first year that this has been
Well, the good news
expressed as a concern.
the good news about the way your current motion is framed is, to this gentleman's question, you didn't cite that, so I think we kind of cut the Gordian knot there. So I can approve it or vote for it in its current form. Had you cited that, even if it is public comment, had you cited that as the reason for that, then I would have gone along with that gentleman's objection.
Can I ask for, just to make sure we get the wording exactly clear on the motion? Because I think the concern from my part and from Mr. Richmond is that the wording probably really matters here.
Maybe he has a recommendation of how we can say what you want.
Well, I don't necessarily have a recommendation, but I do have concerns about formally acknowledging that there's a problem when we don't really know if there's a problem. We're being told by secondhand information that there is a problem. And so it's not a matter that's before you. You haven't heard testimony from anybody on the subject. I think we're just sort of speculating on the matter right now. And I would discourage us from making any, I guess, acknowledging that there is a problem when we're not certain there is one.
May I? So there has been public comment that's been received, and I think what we're actually trying to say is we just don't have enough information, and we're pointing to that lack of information so as to show council that, hey, maybe that is something that we should look more into. That's the concern, is the lack of information, not necessarily that anybody's doing anything wrong. It's just that we are without. So as you say, we don't have enough here to make this determination. That's kind of the point.
Yeah, so hopefully you might be able to say that without expressing the opinion, I guess, that there's a problem.
Oh, sure.
Just express your desire for the city to study the issue, spend some time on the issue, but not necessarily acknowledging that it's a problem that needs to be addressed.
We'll tone it back a little bit. Maybe the word concern is, as Spencer.
What's the current language right now?
I couldn't even tell you.
But the secretary should be able to.
Did you document my?
Text to speech on this
Yeah.
transcript?
You want me to read back?
Yeah.
Okay, so what I have here is Greg Francis moved to include in the findings of fact that the Plan Commission expresses its concern with fire service in the Latah Valley area and recommends further study for consistency with the comprehensive plan. Seconded by Chris Neely.
Seems like half a loaf to me.
That should be fine.
I understand what the point is now. We're expressing concern about something, and it's damnable, I guess.
I'm reaching into my community assembly toolbox here. If you would like, I would be happy to write the motion up on the screen for everyone to see.
He knows how to do that.
Yes.
Maybe another way to approach this is simply that the commission recommends that the findings of fact acknowledge that deliberation was had on consistency for this issue. Because it is public record, so, but if, we do want, if we do want to document it, then let's just state that it's documented in the findings of fact.
I would agree if he was citing the source in his recommendation, but the argument's been prejudiced by the fact that he mentioned that before. But in his current motion, he's not relying on the public testimony. This is an individual who happens to be sitting on the Planning Commission who is saying, I have a concern about fire resources in the Latah Valley, and he's not relying on any given piece of evidence as support for that, or is he making a motion that documentation go to the city council or anything like that? I think it's just a person who's on the Planning Commission has now made this motion, and if you can exclude the fact that I don't know that Greg didn't have this concern before he read that document. So I can't say that he was swayed by that, you know what I mean?
He is asking us all to adopt it, though, potentially.
Councilmember Shook? Or sorry, Councilmember, wow, Commissioner Shook.
Hey, you want us to turn the signs this way?
Yeah.
I really think we should take the advice of the attorney and just wait on it for right now. Greg.
I'm going to withdraw my motion. If anyone wants to make an attempt to do this, I will send a personal comment outside of Plan Commission. So I do have a concern. It's personal, and it's also based upon public fact or public comment. I won't call it public fact. I've never seen a level of service study done. I just saw hundreds of homes burn down in the past 3 months because of poor fire service. We just talked about GFCs where they drained tanks because people thought they needed to water their own homes, which meant they didn't have sufficient faith in their fire system. So this is a growing problem. I do have a concern. Part of it's personal, but part of it's based upon some long-term experience on commission. But I withdraw my motion.
Mr. President, would you consider leaving it for a straight up and down vote?
You
Find
mean,
out what the whole
I've
committee...
already withdrawn the motion, so if someone wants to give it a shot,
Could, as secretary, is it okay if I suggest some language?
I'm not making another motion.
I'd
Not on this
entertain-
item.
I would entertain the language, yeah.
Okay. So, the Plan Commission received comments about fire protection service in Latah Valley and encourages City Council to explore mechanisms for financing additional infrastructure. Is that,
I'll make a motion to accept that language.
You say it one more time, sorry, unless you got it.
I wrote it down here for myself, but the Plan Commission received comments about fire protection service,
Fire Protection Service?
yeah, in the Latah Valley, and encourages City Council to explore mechanisms for financing additional infrastructure.
I second.
Thank you, Commissioner Britt and Commissioner Neely.
Mr. President, I was in California when a good portion of the wine country burned down. I went to get my son, who was at Sonoma State, and it looked like it was snowing from the fires. I have to go along with this. We have to be ready. We saw our neighbors destroyed in California and here, last month? The Latah Valley is the crown jewel of Spokane. It has to be protected. So I'll take this one to the mat.
Okay.
Commissioner Byrither?
Okay, my recommendation would be that we add the word consistency in there somewhere, and we, and maybe it would be, and encourage the city council to explore consistency of, financing additional infrastructure, something related to that, so just flagging it. Again, not,
Well, it's Commissioner Britt's motion, so
oh, I guess I am looking at it, sorry.
How about the consistency of fire protection service? Just add that one word.
Commissioner Shook?
Thank you. Can we ask our attorney what he thinks about that comment? Thank you.
You should sit closer.
I stay so lean.
I know.
I don't usually have to say anything. I'm not sure how the word consistency would fit in there. I helped Spencer put this language together, and I'm not sure how the word consistency fits in there or why it's needed. But
I also don't see quite why. Commissioner, can you?
But may I just actually try my hand at this? So financing additional infrastructure consistent with the comprehensive plan. So we feel better about that.
It's simply, what is our purpose here?
I understand.
Yeah.
I understand. So like to that point, if we put at the very end of it, consistent with the CIP, would that be more in line with? Yes. Okay.
Sure.
Could we add, do I make a motion to add that
You
little
just
portion?
amend your
May I-
original
May I
motion.
amend my original
No,
motion to
don't
add
leave.
language to the end stating, consistent with the CIP, comprehensive plan? Yes, thank you.
Staff can be like-
Second the amended, sorry, Todd.
No, you.
I second
right, not
the amended, well, I will second the amended, as soon as Spencer nods his head that he's okay with the language.
I think that avoids the
I second.
concerns, yeah.
Commissioner Winger?
It's my understanding that our only input is it consistent with the comprehensive plan? Is that correct, Mr. Freibach?
The criteria that you have includes that criteria, yes. So that's one of the approval criteria for a comprehensive plan amendment, is that it be consistent with local plans, including the comprehensive plan.
Thank you.
Any further discussion on this amendment? All right, I'd ask for, we could just do a show of hands on amendments, correct? All in favor of including this amendment? Say aye.
Okay.
Aye.
Aye.
No,
Any opposed? Any abstaining?
I guess I'm abstaining. I just,
Okay.
Okay. So motion passes 8-0 with one abstention. Commissioner Williams.
I'd like to make a motion regarding my concern about the homeless shelter or lack thereof in the planning process. So I would move to include in findings of fact that the Plan Commission is concerned that no project planning for the purchase of a homeless shelter has been included in the CIP process.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner Winger and Commissioner Britt.
Did you catch it? I didn't catch all of it. I'm sorry. Plan Commissioner, can you say that again? Including in the findings of
Move
fact.
to include in findings of fact, the Plan Commission is concerned that no project planning for the purchase of a homeless shelter has been included in the CIP process.
Who seconded
I already did.
this one? Okay. Commissioner Williams, would you consider amending it to change the word purchase to acquire? Not necessarily that the city actually has to buy it. We need the homeless shelter capacity. I categorically agree with that. But we're tying the city's hands if we say they have to buy it.
I mean, this is the capital improvement.
CIP wouldn't include leases,
My bad.
but it would include either purchasing or construction. So,
Would you go with purchase over construction?
Yes, I would accept that for the purchase or construction, and I would accept that as a,
Friendly amendment.
So you're going to withdraw your previous
No, friendly.
and then
you could do a
resubmit?
friendly amendment, or an amendment of it.
Or just amend it?
if it's all right with Christopher, I'll withdraw my amendment and restate it, adding the or construction. So the Plan Commission is concerned that no project planning for the purchase or construction of a homeless shelter has been included in the CIP process.
Second.
Commissioner Winger?
Can that be tied in with the housing chapter of the comprehensive plan? I'm not sure what section, but it should be covered in the housing section somewhere.
Probably multiple sections of the comp plan would apply: housing, public safety, neighborhoods.
If I could just add, I think this is obviously a well-known issue, may influence future elections, but all I want to do is just call out that the process did not include this in it, and it should have. So I wanted to keep it relatively simple without being overly prescriptive about the language, so.
Not to belabor the wording, but one of my concerns with the way that it is phrased is it does specify a homeless shelter, not housing for homeless individuals or house. And a shelter is a very specific type of housing, which does exclude potentially other types of housing.
That's good, right?
Can you sort of explain that? What is a shelter versus, what are we leaving out?
Well, like transitional housing is not a shelter.
Permanent
per se.
supportive housing
I'm-
would be a way to house people who are homeless, but it's, a shelter is inherently temporary.
What would be a better word there then?
What question?
Supportive housing services.
Actually, I intentionally used the word shelter, so because of the numbers, well, if people read that Catholic Charity summary that was recently referenced in the newspaper, I think it's up to about 2,900, 2,300 people, and so the most pressing need that the city can address, and I think should address within their means, is shelter housing. It's very expensive to get into the whole other types of housing and all that. I'm not suggesting that the city take on, boiling the ocean, so to speak, in a very difficult issue, but I think the shelter thing needs to be called out. And given the difficulties we had with the purchase of that, or the lease of that shelter and the purchase option that disappeared, I think it's clear the city did want to address it, but was unsuccessful with that attempt.
Commissioner Shook?
Thank you. I was going to ask, did you say at one point that money for the homeless was not included in this rounds of funds, but can be in another?
The current CIP does not include any project that would be funding to purchase or construct a shelter. And that was the question that Commissioner Williams had asked me.
This was a couple of weeks ago in one of our workshop. Did you say that there is money possibly available?
What I
Venue?
what I believe I alluded to was that if money was secured in the future for that purpose, that the city would then amend the CIP to include it. To say that another way, it not being in the CIP now doesn't prevent it from happening. It simply means that as of right now, as of today, it hasn't been identified, the funding source hasn't been identified for such an action.
There's several things in there without funding.
Okay, any further deliberations on this amendment?
Can you repeat the amendment?
It's on the screen too.
I can read it if you'd like.
Yes,
So the motion is an amendment to include in the findings of fact that Plan Commission is concerned that no project planning for the purchase or construction of a homeless shelter has been included in the CIP process.
Are we ready to vote on this?
So I have a question. I understand what we're trying to do. We want to address this subject, and it's very important to myself. But it seems to me that there's still something before that, like trying to identify where the money can come from. That it still needs to be identified. I'm not sure. I understand what the goal is here, is to bring it to their attention that we would like something to be done or addressed or looked at.
Well, the CIP, as presented before us, includes both funded and unfunded projects. And so the fact that something is unfunded doesn't necessarily preclude it from being in the CIP.
project.
It just identifies it as a specific need where then the city can begin the process of identifying funding sources to actually make them real.
I see, thank you.
Okay, just a voice vote. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstained?
Good job, Tim.
Motion passes.
I think it's okay if we look at.
Do we have any further amendments? All right. Hearing none, any final comments before we vote on this package? All right. Hearing none, let's do a roll call vote, please.
Jesse Bank,
Aye.
Todd Baybrother,
Aye.
Greg Francis,
Aye.
Chris Neely,
Aye.
Ryan Patterson,
Aye.
Carol Shook,
Aye.
Tim Williams,
Aye.
Cliff Winger,
Aye.
Christopher Britt.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Mr. Frybott. With that, we are moving on to our second hearing item of the evening, Building Opportunity for Housing, Phase 2 Code Amendments, as presented by Tim Thompson and Casey Downey.
I think Kevin's wishing he was still up here. You're wishing you were still up here.
To the Comedy Club by 6:30, so I have to walk over to Spokane. About to leave it.
We ready? Rock and roll. All right. Good evening, Plan Commission members. I'm Tim Thompson, Principal Planner. With me tonight, Casey Downey, Associate Planner. And we are here to present the Building Opportunity for Housing Initiative and associated code amendments. As I'm sure you're all aware by now, back in July of 2021, the city adopted a housing action plan. At the same time, the mayor declared a housing emergency. As a result of that housing emergency, in July of last year, an interim ordinance was passed. That interim ordinance was known as Building Opportunity and Choices for All, and it essentially allowed up to 4 dwelling units on any residential lot. It also moved away from floor area ratio, implemented or established some design standards and incentives for centers and corridors. That interim ordinance was good for a year, but it has been extended to December 18th of this year, and that was to allow staff the opportunity to complete these permanent code amendments.
And we just want to remind everyone about the timeline that we've been working on. As Tim just said, the interim ordinance was approved in July 2022 and extended. Then we started work on the Building Opportunity for Housing project. That was the work program associated with the interim ordinance. The comprehensive plan amendments, part of Phase 1, were unanimously approved by City Council in July of this year. And then we transitioned into the code side, so Phase 2. Obviously, we are here tonight. And then we are anticipating a city council hearing on November 13th. Throughout the process, we have had public comments, we've had noticing, and we've also had presentations. A lot of presentations. We have been before Plan Commission and workshops 6 different times. The concepts have been presented in June and July, and then we had specific language proposed starting before the August 23rd workshop. We've also had open houses for the public, both in person and virtual. We've gave a presentation to Spokane Realtors. We also presented before the Spokane Human Rights Commission last week. This list does not include the various presentations that were associated with the Building Opportunity and Choices for All interim ordinance. Those were conducted for realty offices, more presentations for Spokane Realtors, and many other organizations. And during those presentations, we also talked about Building Opportunity for Housing. During this process, we've also tried to reach individuals who may not be able to attend open houses or presentations. So we're really focused on providing different opportunities for people to engage. We had a survey that was provided in 7 languages. We received over 3,500 responses. We held roundtables with community organizations and faith-based organizations, and we held resident forums, 1 in each city council district, and we are very fortunate to hear from a wide range of experiences from homeowners and landlords and renters, including someone who self-proclaimed themselves as unhoused. So we were very, again, thankful that we were able to hear from a wide range of experiences. And what we heard from that engagement are 3 main themes. First, that size and scale is the main thing that concerned or people were identified as something they wanted to pay attention to when it came to infill next to their properties. Second was that design matters. And third, basically that everyone has their own housing journey and there's not one size fits all housing type that can meet all of those needs. So we need to make sure we have a variety of housing options available to everyone. So we know that the proposed text amendments are pretty hefty, specifically when they are put in the official ordinance format. 280 pages is difficult to get through. I mean, even the first 81 pages is just definitions. So we really wanted to call out the specific proposed text amendments and what would really be affected. So the proposed text amendments really affect 2 things, focused on form and scale, and then on process. So for form and scale, we're focusing on regulating housing, again, by form and scale, rather than by housing type or density. We're removing the maximum density standards for lots less than 2 acres in size. We're proposing to implement objective design standards, modify parking regulations, and update development standards to support the feasibility of middle housing. When it comes to process, really the focus is to clean up the process, make it easier to leverage these proposed changes. That includes increasing opportunities for homeownership by expanding the lot subdivision opportunities, clarifying existing processes and procedures, reorganizing the Spokane Municipal Code sections to improve the usability, and that reorganization follows along with us proposing to repeal 17C 110 and 17G 060 and replacing those like for like with the proposed changes with 17C 111 and 17G 061, just to make it an easier process so people can identify kind of the changes that are being proposed. First and foremost, we are proposing to rename 2 of the zones. Currently, residential single-family and residential two-family really focus on the housing type or one housing type being allowed in those zones, and the proposed changes really make those names not consistent or accurate of the housing types that are permitted. So the proposal is to replace the RSF zone with residential 1 or R1, the RTF zone with residential 2 or R2, and we are also proposing to remove the residential single-family compact zone, as a lot of the allowances previously permitted in the compact zone will just be allowed by default with the proposed regulations. We are not currently proposing to rename or modify the residential multifamily or residential high-density zones. Those may be considered at another time, but we really felt that wasn't really in the scope of the middle housing focus of these regulations. Perhaps the largest shift that we are looking at with these proposed regulations is how we regulate housing capacity. Currently, we are looking at housing really being regulated by density, the number of units that are allowed per acre. What that has resulted in is detached single-unit homes being the primary housing type permitted throughout the city, with about 2/3 of the residential land in Spokane being limited to those detached single-unit homes. There are also additional development barriers and additional hoops in place for other housing types that are currently permitted, such as attached housing and cottage housing, that essentially makes those impossible or difficult to build, so we haven't seen those housing types developed. We also see that while we're focusing on density, there is a bit less regulation on the actual structure. So again, with the engagement, we heard that size and scale is what matters. So that is why our proposal has shifting to focusing on that size and scale instead of the number of units. By doing this, we also feel that it no longer disincentivizes smaller units. With the current regulations and how it stands, if you get X number of units on our lot, there's not really a reason to make them smaller because you're not going to get any additional units. With these proposed regulations, if there is a desire to make smaller units, we feel like now you can fit a few extra in, so no longer, again, disincentivizes those units. We do want to note that projects 2 acres or more must still show consistency with the density ranges found in the comprehensive plan. This is to ensure that those larger projects are following the regulations in place. However, we see that with the infill, smaller lot development, less than 2 acres, we already have the capacity. We've already expected a certain level of development that we're anticipating under these proposed regulations. So not showing the density calculations for those smaller units will still allow us to provide that capacity. We created graphics to help illustrate this concept. Really, the idea is you can have a box, and it can look the same on the outside, but all you have to do is look on the inside, play around with the walls, and you can provide different number of units. So you can see with this one footprint or structure, you can have a single unit detached home, you can have a duplex, you can have a fourplex. We even played around, and by having smaller unit sizes, we found a way to fit 7 units within that same box. So again, it's the idea of focusing on scale and form of that building, not necessarily the number of units, and allowing the desired market for who will rent or buy these units to really help determine the size and how many units will be provided on that lot.
So some of the changes that are being proposed from a dimensional standpoint, what we're trying to do is, again, ease the development while ensuring small-scale compatibility. Whoops. So some of the proposed changes are reducing the lot width from 16 feet down to 15 feet. It was brought to our attention that if you had a 100-foot wide lot, which wouldn't be uncommon if you had 2 50-foot wide lots adjacent to one another 100 feet. If you take away the setbacks, you end up with 90 feet, and 90 is divisible by 15. So we, in essence, could potentially pick up an additional unit just by reducing that lot width from 16 down to 15 feet. We're looking at reducing the minimum lot area, implementing consistent building coverage. We want to remove the floor area ratio. We're proposing to increase the height by 5 feet. Now, I think it's important to note the current code is at 35 feet. The BOCA standards are at 40 feet, and we're proposing to remain at that 40-foot. Reduce the front setback from 15 feet down to 10 feet. And then also reduce the rear yard setback. So in that R1 district, the rear setback is 25 feet, which is a pretty good amount of space. And so we're proposing to reduce that down to 15 feet. It's also important to note that there are instances where some structures could be located within that rear yard setback area. So the lot coverage standard would more so apply in that particular instance, particularly on the smaller lots. We've proposed to implement a maximum impervious surface requirement. So one of the challenges that we heard through our outreach was that storm drainage was identified as a barrier and how to deal with that. And so working with our engineering staff, we're proposing a maximum impervious surface to try and deal with some of the stormwater runoff concerns that we heard. And then the maximum footprint. So as Casey mentioned, that size and scale of the buildings mattered to folks when we talked to them during our public outreach efforts. And so what this proposal is to essentially, for lots of 7,000 square feet or less, the maximum building footprint is 2,450 square feet. And that number is 35% of 7,000 square feet. So for those smaller lots, the maximum footprint would be 2,450 square feet. Now, keep in mind there's height limits, so up to potentially 3 stories. So that structure is not simply limited to that 2,450 square feet. On larger lots, once you get over 7,000 square feet, it's now just 35% of whatever the lot area is. And so the idea behind that is to limit the size and scale of those buildings, because what we heard from our outreach again was that mattered to folks. And that's an attempt to try to, I think, keep it within that context of those existing single-family neighborhoods. So we're proposing some development bonuses, and really the bonus is an increase in building coverage. So we go from 65% up to 80% for the R1, and then from 80% to 90% for that R2 district. And ultimately, we're hoping the result of that is just additional units. Those development bonuses would apply to religious organizations. It would apply to projects that have affordable units. It would apply to properties that are within a half mile of a major transit stop or centers and corridors. And then you can see the affordability requirement. So we've tried to tie that affordability requirement back into some of those existing requirements, so we're not reinventing the wheel. Another item that we heard was that the cottage housing pocket residential standards were cumbersome and difficult for some folks to make a project viable. And so through this process, we are proposing to repeal those sections of the code because those cottage style developments would now be allowed by right through this proposed zoning. So we feel like we're again, becoming more flexible and removing some of those arduous regulations that folks had told us about.
A second theme, again, that we heard from the public engagement was that design matters, not just for aesthetic purposes, but also to improve walkability and accessibility of the public realm, i.e. sidewalks, to increase safety and to encourage community connection. So with those goals in mind, we have proposed design standards. These design standards are objective and per state regulation apply to single unit dwellings as well as middle housing. Those regulations include window standards and building entrances. Those really are focused on ensuring there's not a blank wall facing the street. So again, that encourages walkability. We have eyes on the street, which increases safety. It is important to note that for building entrances, for projects that have more than one unit in a building or multiple buildings, only one unit is required to have an entrance facing the street. So it does allow for some flexibility of how those buildings and units can be oriented on the lot. Building articulation has also been proposed. This is to meet the recent comprehensive plan amendments that focus on compatibility within these small-scale residential areas. The building articulation standards are intended to keep those structures within that, again, that small-scale built form. We have provided a menu of options with the building articulation. You can have design features, you can bump the buildings forward or back, which is a bit easier now that the front setback is being reduced. You can change the materials, have different colors. The idea here is to create a baseline that builders can look towards to create these projects, but still allow flexibility for different architectural styles or just fit different things within those building designs. One big comment that we've heard throughout the engagement was concern that these regulations would permit basically a wall of garages facing the street. So to recognize those concerns, garage requirements and standards have been kept in place. These regulations for garages that reduce the width of the garage and require the garage to be set back 2 feet from the main facade were included in the interim ordinance. We have seen projects be submitted that have met these requirements, and based on feedback from that engagement, we've kept those regulations in the proposed text amendments. Also, in response to feedback we've heard, we are proposing a structure setback, essentially creates an angled plane. So while we're allowing additional height, if you're taking advantage of that additional height, you will either need to push the building further into the lot or design the roof to fit within that angle. That is to ensure that we are protecting the feel of some of the areas while preventing too much shadows or privacy encroachment, again, based off feedback that we heard. We're also proposing landscaping standards. The 50% of basically the front yard needs to be landscaped. That means it can't all be paving, it can't all be rock. That is really to prevent any runoff concerns and also prevent really the heat that is created by having a solid pavement or solid rock area. Of note, the 50% does not have to be lawn. In fact, we are encouraging Spokanescape for landscaped areas. So that would be native and drought tolerant plants to encourage, again, not just having a lot of lawn. We're also proposing visitability standards. Visitability standards are essentially encouraging some more accessible units. The Fair Housing Act really applies to multifamily larger apartment complexes, and there's not really that many accessibility requirements for most of the housing types that fit within the middle housing definition. So there's kind of a hole there. So from engagement that we heard with concerns that these units may not be accessible to all individuals, we are providing ideas to developers on how to make those units accessible. But we're also creating a ability to have a deviation to height setbacks or building coverage or other dimensional standards if an accessibility feature is being added. So in that way, we're not penalizing units that are made accessible to hopefully encourage more accessible units.
So one of the primary themes that we've tried to address is really building opportunity for home ownership as well. As we all know, prices are going up, and so how do we create opportunities for home ownership? And so one of the ways that we are proposing to do that is to make some changes to particularly, it was called our alternative residential design standards or subdivision standards, and we've changed that to unit lot subdivision, which we can talk about here in a moment. But essentially, it allows for situations such as this, where you have, I'll pick the third from the left, where that could be a typical 6,000 or 7,000 square foot lot that has an existing structure. And we don't necessarily want to see those existing structures be torn down, because we know that those are some of the more affordable housing units that we have. But it allows for further subdivision of that lot. It allows for those lots to be developed, sold, which provides ownership opportunity for someone, but it also provides an opportunity for wealth for the person that owns that particular property. As they sell those lots, sell those units, there's some wealth. So we were proposing some modifications to Title 17G, really just consolidate sections, reorder, add some definitions for types 1, 2, 3 permits, new subdivision requirements related to middle housing, expand the unit lot subdivision, and then allow binding site plans for residential lots. So as I mentioned, that unit lot subdivision, again, gosh, I did it again. Titled Alternative Residential Subdivision. So the unit lot subdivision was just more consistent with language that we found throughout the rest of the state. No longer limited to cottage or pocket type developments. Those two types of developments came with some additional standards, and we've basically just eliminated those additional standards. And typically it was outdoor space or common open space. Allow any type of residential on 2 acres or less. Again, it just allows anything. There's just great flexibility for any development site less than 2 acres in size. Flexible lot sizes, setbacks. Again, the focus here is on that parent lot. So we're looking at a lot, let's just say again, we're at 100 by 120, so 2 typical infill lots that may be vacant. Somebody wants to come in and develop a cottage type development that targets seniors, so they're going to be single story, provide those visibility standards that Casey talked about. These proposed amendments will help us better achieve a situation like that. We focus the setback requirements on that parent development, so the setbacks, the side setbacks of 5 feet, the 15 at the rear, the 10 at the front would apply to that larger parent lot. And then as you subdivide that down into smaller lots potentially, then the actual building code requirements then kick in. And so in that particular instance, if under certain construction methods, a wall of one of those buildings could be actually closer than 5 feet from the property line. So it just provides much greater flexibility for just the various types of developments that I think we're trying to encourage. And it helps, again, to achieve that home ownership opportunity. So at one of your workshops, we talked about including a standard that would apply to subdivisions of greater than 2 acres, where we would require at least 3 different housing types. So in that subdivision, you could have duplexes, or you would be required to have duplexes. You could be required to have attached housing, townhomes, single unit, detached, potentially even multiplexes, accessory dwelling units. After a lot of discussion, after some comments that we received, we're actually recommending or proposing that the Plan Commission eliminate that standard tonight, and that you not move forward with that recommendation tonight. While we think it's a great idea and it promotes inclusive neighborhoods, I think there were some challenges logistically of how do you implement something like this, and so we'd like to take a little more time to really think about this and solicit some additional feedback from the developers who would have to adhere to that requirement. We heard a lot about tear down and rebuilds, and I mentioned that some of the most affordable housing is our existing housing stock, and so we believe that these proposed standards will help to preserve that existing housing stock. It'll allow us to leverage those larger lots, subdivide, build additional units. We're not promoting the demolition of buildings. We heard that loud and clear. We had a great discussion with our historic preservation staff and really talked about some of the challenges and really trying to maintain some of those existing structures, particularly within those more historic type neighborhoods. This will promote the conversion of units, whether it be a larger structure that is essentially subdivided internally into duplexes or additional multiplex, potentially turn sections of larger historic homes into those individual units as well.
The interim ordinance that was passed in July of 2022 did not touch parking regulations, and we have heard feedback as we've tried to identify additional barriers that were in place that some of the minimum parking regulations could be a barrier in place. City Council also heard similar feedback, and just in July, City Council passed an interim parking ordinance that removed the minimum parking requirements for residential uses within a half mile of all transit stops. So within these proposed regulations, we are looking at parking regulations. Within the draft is proposed a middle ground between the interim parking ordinance passed by City Council and the middle housing parking requirements required by state law. So what that middle ground is no parking being required for residential development on sites located within 1/2 mile of a major transit stop. That major transit stop is the definition of the city, which is a stop with 15-minute or better service at peak period. That is roughly 10 or so bus routes within the city at this time. Additionally, outside of any buffer for middle housing developed in the R1 and R2 zones, the parking would be regulated by the lot size, not the number of units. That specific language is from HB 1110, is a state regulation. We heard from Plan Commission that there may be desire to look at implementing more of the interim parking ordinance that was passed by City Council. As such, alternative language was provided in the staff report as an exhibit, and it'll be up to Plan Commission to recommend whichever parking regulation that you all choose. Essentially, the purpose of the parking regulations is to look at easing some of the barriers within housing development, but also providing access to transit or alternative transportation for individuals. Would like to note that about 7.9% or 18,000 residents in Spokane do not own a car. So adding some flexibility to parking will allow individuals or developers to identify the market they're trying to build to rent or sell to, and have more flexibility in how many parking spaces they require. Also like to note that this would be focusing on the parking minimum. This does not mean parking will not be permitted. We did have a lot of one-on-one conversations with developers. There are still a number of developers who wish to provide parking, who wish to provide garages. It just allows some flexibility for some of the other developments that may be choosing to remove a few parking spaces to make a project pencil.
Casey, can I ask a quick question? You said 7.9% don't own cars. Is that households or individuals?
That was households.
Okay, thank you.
Also provided in the draft code at the very top is some ordinance language where we are directing or requesting direction of city clerk to update any stray references to outdated sections or old zone names elsewhere in the code. We did look at a sizable chunk of the code, but there's plenty more. So we are hoping to direct city clerk to make any of those necessary changes. On the next slide, we did identify some currently in the code that maybe can fix up now, but we are, again, hoping for a city clerk to make those updates. And if Plan Commission chooses to emphasize updating, we did provide some language where you can have a motion to just make sure that the city clerk has that authorization. So, again, this is a hefty code. As we were going through, you're still going to find some tweaks. So we do have some suggested changes. Language has been provided to Plan Commission if you so choose to make these changes. The first is to update Table 17C.111.2051 to reflect a minimum lot size area of 1,200 square feet for R1, R2, RMF, and RHD. This was a discussion point at the last workshop. We did identify that in order to align the minimum lot widths with the minimum lot depths, you would need to reduce the minimum lot area from 1,800 square feet to 1,200 square feet. I did get a little ahead of myself, and the staff report incorrectly identifies 1,200 square feet. However, it was our intention to allow Plan Commission to make that determination on whether the lot size area should be reduced to that 1,200. Again, as Tim said, we are suggesting removal of the middle housing subdivision requirements under 17G.080.050F, and that is just, again, to allow us more time to consider the implications both on developers but as well as on internal staff on regulating and managing those requirements. Just some cleanup items with naming and references. We are requesting that the table on development standards for land owned by religious organizations be renamed. This is really about the density bonuses that apply to religious organizations, but also affordable housing and housing provided near centers and quarters and near transit. So we are requesting that you update the table number, just to be correct, and update the name to show that it applies to additional housing providers, not just those provided by religious organizations. We are also recommending adding a footnote to that table just to directly send people to where the criteria for the development bonuses are located. The other two items is just updating references that go to 17C110 that are now 17C111 with that transition. So again, there is some language provided to Plan Commission if you choose to make those changes.
Quick question on, so the religious organizations, that's to align with the new RCW, right? Is the definition per state RCW, or is there a definition or SMCs on what a religious organization is? I just don't know.
So we did provide a definition for religious organizations, but it was based in reference on state regulations.
Thank you.
So in summary, again, we really want to focus on what these regulations will do. Really, our focus is on providing opportunities for more housing types, but also providing opportunities for more home ownership. We believe that the proposed recommendations and the standards will increase the allowance and feasibility of middle housing, and the flexibility will allow us to leverage unique lots and think creatively about those infill lots that we really have and need to figure out how to develop on. And we're also hoping not penalize projects if they're looking to build smaller units, if they're looking at a target market that desires smaller units or different living styles. With the UNILA subdivision standards and other changes to 17G, we also believe this will allow for more opportunities for home ownership. Unlike the interim ordinance that didn't have these changes to how lots can be created, we believe that we can create both rental opportunities, which are needed and important as well, but also home ownership opportunities by allowing those additional flexibilities. We did receive public comments. I believe we are now at 27 public comments. One was sent to you all this afternoon as it was received. And we've had a range of public comments. All of them have been provided to Plan Commission to review and look at. They have ranged from support of the increased housing options as well as concerns of having more units and design and adjacency impacts of those units. There has been support from religious institutions on how this will allow them to provide affordable housing. There have also been reservations about some of the platting requirements that really reflect state regulation. and just a gambit of, again, those comments that have been provided to Plan Commission to review. This has been a long process with a lot of engagement, and we have heard a lot of questions being asked. And we kind of want to summarize some of those questions, both for benefit of Plan Commission, but as well as any members of the public who may be listening. So the first question that we really hear is middle housing affordable housing? We cannot run from the fact that building new makes it difficult to rent or sell for cheap without subsidies. Fortunately, a number of our existing financial incentives really layer nicely with these regulations. For example, a multifamily tax exemption applies for projects that are 4 or more new units, and that can provide more affordable housing depending on location and the requirements of that MFTE project. So we do believe that there are opportunities for actual capital A affordable housing for low-income households. Away from the capital A affordable housing, we also know that middle housing provides more attainable price points that are attainable to more income levels than the typically newly built detached single unit home. This is because of smaller unit sizes, typically smaller lot sizes, as well as the ability to distribute the cost of land amongst more units than just one, as we would see with a detached single unit home. The Department of Commerce has also provided information about how, aside from rent and purchase prices, middle housing tends to be cheaper to maintain and heat. So even once someone gets into a unit, it does tend to be more attainable, again, to more income levels.
So another question that has come up quite frequently is whether or not the existing infrastructure can handle the additional units, the additional middle housing units. And we believe the answer is yes. We, as a staff, did some analysis. We've looked at some various subdivisions throughout the city and determined that those subdivisions were actually developed on the lower end of the density range. So in that residential single-family, now R1, proposed R1 district, that density range is 4 dwelling units per acre up to 10 dwelling units per acre. And so when projects come in and are developed initially, the number of units or that density range is used to determine how much infrastructure is needed to serve those properties. And so when you talk about that range of 4 to 10 and you look at what's actually physically out in the city is on the lower end of that density range, we believe that there is some additional capacity within that existing infrastructure to accommodate these additional middle housing units. If any of you are interested, the city has adopted level of service standards, which can be found in Appendix C of our comprehensive plan. And so although there may be some perceived level of service issues, that's what we refer back to, are those level of service standards that are in the comprehensive plan. That's what those decisions are based off of. So for example, the minimum water pressure, I believe, is 45 PSI. So many of those are numerical metrics, they're standards, they can be quantified, and that's how we would determine whether or not a particular piece of the infrastructure was deficient or did not meet those level of service standards. It's not based on someone's perception. We have standards listed in the comprehensive plan that help guide those decisions.
Another question that we hear is, will design standards negatively impact middle housing feasibility? As I'm kind of emphasizing it a lot, but it's one of the big themes that we heard throughout our engagements, that design matters. And so we have tried to incorporate design standards that provide a baseline that will not harm feasibility of middle housing, may require some redesigns or figuring around, but will provide design that is appropriate for the areas while also not negatively impacting feasibility. The feasibility analysis that was provided by one of our consultants and provided in the staff report did not identify really design standards as killing any middle housing projects. Again, there may need to be some redesigns, but the design standards proposed were not identified as preventing the feasibility of these housing types. Additionally, we want to emphasize that the design standard process does allow for deviations and waivers depending on on the type of design standard if there is a proposal that wishes to deviate from those design standards. Additionally, any projects that go through a planned unit development do have the potential to have different design standards. So we do provide some flexibility with the design standards in place depending on the process that the project is going to go through. But again, we really focus on creating that baseline to then allow some flexibility and options and menu options for those. The other question that we will end on is, will single-unit homes still be allowed? The answer is yes, yes, and yes. In fact, we believe that these regulations may allow single-unit homes to be built easier with the unit lot subdivision and some of the other standards. We believe that single-unit homes may be easier now. You can have unique lot sizes. So we do anticipate both middle housing, the traditional middle housing of attached houses, cottages, duplexes, fourplexes, but also single-unit homes to take advantage of these regulations. And with that, we would like to open up for any questions from Plan Commission.
Commissioner Williams?
Great presentation, and thank you for all your work. This is really good stuff. Just a minor question on one of the design standards. There's like in parentheses it has a P, and others have a parentheses R. Could you clarify what the R signifies and what the P signifies?
Yes, so the R is for requirements. Those are kind of the default. These are, all projects need to meet these in order to get a building permit. Any deviation from requirements does require going through the design departure process through our urban design group. Ps are, if I always get the word right, I believe it's
Presumptions.
Presumptions. Those have a bit lower barrier to overcome. Those can be a waiver through the current planning review process and doesn't go to our urban design staff.
When you say the current planning review process, who would make that determination about whether one of the P category items was, exceptions was allowed?
Yeah, so the official determination is through the planning director. Current planning is given the authority of the planning director, but typically those are conversations that occur to make sure that the proposal meets the intent and purpose under those design standards.
Commissioner Bank?
So I'll echo Commissioner Williams. The fantastic work. This is obviously a huge, huge project to take under a deadline, no less. So congratulations to everyone who's worked on this. Back to the deadline idea, I know that there was a tremendous amount to try to cram into this very short period of time in working with these codes, and I know that we're out kind of on the bleeding edge of trying some of these things from a code perspective. Is there some sort of feedback mechanism that's built into this whole project where, as we learn things, as projects go through the pipeline and we say, oh, geez, this really isn't working. Do we need to tweak this? Do we need to adjust this to make sure that generally the ship is headed where we'd like it to be headed? Because it seems to me that this is we've gotten through the important stuff with the comprehensive plan and with the code changes, but now that this is sort of almost like a trial period, extended trial period for these code changes. So I'd love to hear thoughts on that.
That's probably a me question. We fully expect that we will learn more. I mean, we've had a year with the BOCA regulations, and by and large, we're not deviating too much from those. But we expect that we will continue to learn, and we are committed to continuing to update our code based on what we hear.
And just what is the process? Is that something that comes back to Plan Commission? Is that administrative code changes?
That would be subsequent updates that come to Plan Commission. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
And I would add, if I could, that the Plan Commission plays a role in this as well. So if you're all hearing something or there's a challenge that you're hearing people are having, then certainly you can come to staff and we can work to address some of those concerns as well.
Commissioner Bayreuther.
Thank you. Congratulations. This is appreciate your lead on all of this. So to set up our later deliberation, can you just help us again kind of restate the difference between a development standard and a design standard, because there's both of them in here. We've always had development standards in residential neighborhoods, but in zones, but we haven't had design standards for the most part for the 1 and 2, R1 and R2 zones. And so is that true? And then secondly, am I correct that there are not departure opportunities within development standards, only in design standards.
Maybe I can take that one too. That's a little more complicated. We have had what I think you're calling design standards in our residential zones, but they've only applied to certain housing types. So in our existing code, there are sections that deal with specific housing types, for example, attached housing or duplexes, that have standards where a traditional detached home does not have any kind of standard applied. So I think what you're getting at is this is introducing design standards to a housing type that hasn't had them traditionally, but it's not really based on the zone. It's been more based on the housing type. One of the things coming out of HB 1110 is really clear direction from the state that where possible, we should be treating middle housing the same way as detached homes in terms of how we regulate them. And so part of the proposal here is to try to align with what we feel the state is telling us. And that would be that if we are going to have standards on certain middle housing types, that those standards also need to be applied to detached homes.
So just to restate that, and that's my understanding too, is we're bringing a detached into a more restrictive attached design standard
Yes.
to make them equal.
Yes. So, and your second question was about design standards versus development standards. Development standards would be things like lot setbacks or height limits. There are very, very limited circumstances where there's an ability to deviate from those, and those are generally based on an unusual situation where the economic loss to the property owner would essentially render that lot useless if we don't grant some kind of deviation. But there's not really a regular mechanism for getting those kinds of deviations on things like setbacks or heights. On design standards, those sections are structured in a different way, and those design standards have a purpose statement that leads, which describes why that design standard is in place, and provides some guidance for staff on the deviation process that can follow. So there is an established path for deviations from those design standards, and as Casey noted, it depends on whether it's a requirement or a presumption.
Yep. Thank you. That helps a lot. I'm sorry, one quick follow-up. A development standard deviation still is under the authority of the planning director with potential appeal to the hearing examiner.
You're talking about development standards.
Yes, I'm sorry. Is that what I said? Development standards.
Yes. So setbacks, heights, those kinds of things. Yes, I think those would generally be appealable to the hearing examiner because that's a decision made by the planning director.
And that's the same for design standards with exceptions of a couple overlays.
I don't know the design standards section as well, so I'm not sure whether that appeals to the hearing examiner or if it goes to a different entity first.
Yeah, there's complexities there within design review board and so forth with appeal from them, their decision, but okay, thank you.
Any additional questions for staff at this time?
Go ahead.
Commissioner Patterson?
A clarification on the garage standards. That only applies to garages that face the street, right?
That is correct. There wouldn't be a garage limitation if it's on the side not facing the street or if it's a rear garage, either attached or detached. It's just street facing.
Commissioner Williams?
Just having received this, and then it sounded like most of this made a lot of sense. So these, I just want to make sure I have the context. So these are recommendations from staff to modify the existing proposal kind of last minute. Hey, this would be better if we got this fix in and this fix in and this fix in.
Most of them are. The second one on alternative parking regulations is a point of discussion. The other ones are all recommended changes.
So we could have a motion to adopt all of these except for the parking one to make the process go a little faster. Is that?
I guess I would also point to the removal of the middle housing requirements as perhaps worthy of some discussion because it's not so much a clerical correction, it's actually substantive. It is staff's recommendation that that should be removed. Again, that's based on some further feedback internally and externally in the time since the packet was put into the agenda. But I think other than those two, they are essentially, cleaning up little clerical issues.
I'd still maybe recommend that each of them be handled separately, just to keep it clean.
To keep it clean.
Because this isn't,
'Cause
it's not really
discussion
part
can
of the
get messy.
record. Yeah. So, any further questions for staff
I know you did.
at this time?
Appreciate it.
Are you tired?
Getting there.
All right, thank you, Casey. Thank you, Tim. With that, we are going to move to public comment. And do we have any public comment in person or online? Oh, yes. Please come up and state your name, and you have 5 minutes.
Hi there, my name is Harold Vanderpool. I live at 721 South Conklin, which is in East Central. And I'd like to recognize these guys have been doing some great work here. This is really a huge project, as you guys have acknowledged. But I do want to raise issue with a couple of items that are currently in the draft recommendations. First of all, I'd like to just state that one of the things that came out of the Chapter 3 land use changes that were adopted by the City Council as part of the Phase 1 of this project included some really good language and focused on wanting to preserve the uniqueness of Spokane's neighborhoods, and it had specific language that talked about compatible and complementary to encourage that type of development in order to preserve the uniqueness of the neighborhoods. I would argue that the massing and the height, as well as the quality of the urban forest, but I'm particularly interested in massing and height as it applies to the development regulations. I think that this is one of the biggest factors that affects people's perception of what is unique in a neighborhood. And I would also point out that some of the primary feedback from community input, as the staff noted, was size and scale matters a lot. And if you think about the different neighborhoods in town, you'll think about often sort of consistencies in height of buildings, consistency in spacing of buildings, and so on. And those are some of the characteristics that make a neighborhood unique. I would say architectural details are important, but they're not the major factor if you want to, if we're going to try to describe the uniqueness of the neighborhoods. So in particular, I'm going to take issue with the height in the draft regulations, specifically in the R1 and the R2 zones that are proposed. The increase, from my understanding of reading the red lines, is that it previously was 20 feet was the maximum roof height and has gone to 40 feet maximum overall height in the new. And that's a doubling of it. Also, I think the main point of these regulation changes is to increase middle housing for Spokane. And of the listed types, identified types of middle housing, I don't know any of them that depend upon a height of 40 feet. So I specifically would be encouraging the Planning Commission to change the maximum height that's been recommended for R1 and R2. And somewhat related to that is that height recommendation is carried over into the RMF and the RHD, the residential high density zones. And that has just carried over as a 40-foot thing. And specifically in the RMF zone, it actually makes the maximum height of a building 55 feet when you put a sloped roof on it. And so I think one of the pieces of feedback that I got from the team here is that, and hearing them talk too, I think it's pretty clear that the focus of their work in this project has really been on the R1 and R2. And so another recommendation I'd like to make to the Planning Commission is that the changes that are substantive for the RMF and the RHD should actually be either opened up for more focused public input and comment, or they shouldn't just be accepted out of hand because we increase this in this place, well, then it's obvious we want to increase it here. I think that those zones are actually very unique, and I think that they're actually more complicated, I think, than the R1 and the R2, and I think they need to be handled with a little more care. Okay. So the one thing I'd like to also mention is that the angled setbacks are a really good addition in order to try to handle this factor of massing and height, but I think they're currently insufficient. I think that if with the lowered heights, I don't think they would be as germane, but currently they don't sufficiently provide the amelioration that would be needed for a 40-foot high, 40-foot tall building, a 4-story building, I might add, in an R1 or R2 zone. And I'd just like to state for the record that I do not live in an R1 or an R2 zone. So I'm actually arguing for something that doesn't affect me personally in these zones. Okay, almost done. Also, the other thing that there's no limit on is the maximum facade length right now, which I think is also something that ought to have an absolute limit. There's our building articulation, currently set at 40 feet or 30 feet, which is great because it helps break up a long facade, but there's actually no limitation on how long a building can be, as long as it fits within, I think, the 35% coverage area of the lot that it's being built on. And I can say from personal experience that when you live next to a 160-foot long wall of a building, that is a very, very massive building. So that's a little personal experience. And then I think I'm almost done. Thank you for listening. It was my first time testifying in person, so I was a little nervous. And so I appreciate your attention.
Did fine. Thank you. Okay, do we have anyone online that would like to testify?
Do you not have anyone online?
Okay, with that, we are actually going to recess until 6 o'clock to give us a quick break before we begin deliberations. And before we do so, I will close public comment at this time. And when we get back, we will begin deliberations. So 6 p.m., we're coming back. Thank you.
We have pizza.
All right, we are back from our brief recess, and thank you for that break. So what we are going to begin with is we are going to go ahead and start with our initial motion, and then we'll work from there.
I'd like to move that we recommend that the proposal to all of the sections of Title 17 A, C, D, and G in the Spokane Municipal Code as presented by staff and included in our packet.
Thank you, Commissioner Patterson and Commissioner Shook. Okay, with that, I think probably the best thing we can do is if we can take care of the small staff adjustments first, and then maybe we can begin deeper deliberation, if that works for everybody. So I think we'll skip the alternative parking regulations because that is definitely one that's going to require discussion. Updating minimum lot area square footage. This is a recommendation to move from 1,800 square feet to 1,200 square feet. And so can I get an amendment motion for that?
Mr. President, let's see. I move to update table 17C.111.205-1 to implement a minimum lot area of 1,200 square feet for the R1, R2, RMF, and RHD zones.
Thank you, Commissioner Bank. Thank you,
Can I
Commissioner
just
Winger.
ask if someone can help me on what page number in the agenda or the packet that shows up on? I'm close.
Good question. Don't have that. Second.
Got it. 97.
Do we have a question? Do we
Thank you.
have a question when we're,
Is that right?
when you're ready?
Okay, you have a question,
Yes.
Commissioner Shook?
I
Okay,
do.
go ahead.
Okay, so on the, you were asking for update minimum lot area square footage. I thought it was said earlier that we weren't going to make any, are we including the minimum of the RMF on that and the RHD on that, on this one? Did we say, I'm asking Casey.
I can respond to that.
Okay.
So the reason that we're also proposing to update RMF and RHD is simply because we wouldn't want to have a regulation that appears to me more strict or onerous on those RMF and RHD zones than what we have in R1 and R2. So because we would be reducing the minimum lot size to what's lower than in the current code, we felt like it would make sense to apply it across the board to all of them.
And can I make a comment? And even within the RMF and RHD zones, it doesn't preclude someone from having a single unit home or a 2-unit home on a smaller lot. So it still would be applicable in those zones.
Okay, thank you.
Any further discussion on this amendment? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor of including the amendment to change minimum lot area to 1,200 square feet, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Thank you. Amendment passes. Let's move on to the next one. We'll skip removing middle housing for a moment. Cleanup development bonus regulations. I'll go ahead and make this motion because there's another modification that's in here as well. The table is actually misnumbered. It says 205-2 and it's supposed to be 205-3. So I move to update and make consistent the development bonuses regulations by renaming the second table 1711.111.205-2 to development standards for properties qualifying for development bonus and changing the table number to 17C.111.205-3 and adding a footnote 2 to the same table to read criteria to qualify for density development bonuses is outlined in SMC 17C.111.225.
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner Williams.
So just to clarify, so on page 100, it's the table number's wrong in the packet?
Correct.
That's what we're doing here?
Yeah, there's actually two table numbers
With the same number.
205-2.
Okay.
And the second, so we're renaming the second table number that says 205-2, which currently reads Development Standards for Land Use, Land Owned by Religious Organizations. We're making that more generic
Oh,
to
okay.
Development Standards for Properties Qualifying for Development Bonus.
Okay, thank you.
And where it's referred to later, in 111.225 actually references the table number correctly. It's just the table number itself is incorrect. Any further discussion on that item? Hearing none. All in favor of the amendment, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right. Any abstentions? Okay, motion passes. Okay, updating references. Someone want to do that one? This is an amendment opportunity.
I move to update and make consistent references found in 17C.111 by updating 17C.111.225 subsection B to reference table 17C.111.205-3 rather than 17C.110.205-3, and update section 17C.111.235, section B, subsection 2B, to reference 17C.111.230 instead of 17C.110.230.
Thank you, Commissioner Winger.
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner Bank. All this does is it fixes a 110 to 111 issue for these two sections. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, any abstentions? All right, motion passes. Clerical adjustments, fixing some or things that weren't labeled correctly. Someone want to do these?
I'll do it. I'd move to recommend that the city clerk be authorized to make clerical adjustments to all sections of Title 17 for the purposes of ensuring consistency with the proposal, including replacing references to RSF with R1, replacing references to RTF with R2, removing references to RSFC, updating all references to ensure correct section and subsection identifiers, updating all table numbers to be consistent with the usage established in this proposal, which is to number tables with the title, chapter, and section, followed by a dash and sequential number.
Thank you, Commissioner Patterson.
I second it.
Thank you, Commissioner Shook. Any discussion on this?
Question. Is it necessary to add including but not limited to those items? Is it advantageous?
It wouldn't hurt to have it in there. I don't think it really matters.
Would you like to make a
I
friendly
would
amendment?
make a friendly amendment to add the language, but not limited to, following the word including.
So you accept that?
Yes.
Okay. So with the amendment of miscellaneous, basically, any other changes? Yeah.
Any other consistency?
Yes. Any discussion on this item? All right. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion passes. Okay.
Oh my gosh, we're almost done.
Yeah, we got the easy ones done. Okay. So staff has recommended the removing of middle housing subdivision requirements. Now, obviously, this is an issue for Plan Commission to discuss. So if we want to bring a motion to the table, we can do that, or we can discuss it and then bring a motion. Is there a preference on this? So this is item number 4. Just to remove some middle housing subdivision requirements on lots that are 2 acres or more, or divisions.
Is there a possibility that we can have like another session on this in Plan Commission? Is this the last date we can talk about it?
Well, I think the desire was to remove it because we feel like there needs to be a little more process around it. So by removing it, we're effectively not changing the status quo.
So perhaps it could then be added to the work plan in the future for further discussion?
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, that could be part of the amendment is to remove it from the proposal, but recommend that it be added as an item for consideration in the future.
I like that one better.
Yeah, I support that. I think it's a big topic, and it deserves its own time, and get it right.
Okay. So seeing there's an appetite, I'm going to make a motion because there's actually a minor correction here. I move to remove middle housing mix of housing requirements for subdivisions greater than 2 acres by striking SMC 17G.080.050F and striking SMC 17G.080.050G5, which references F, and recommending that this be added to the Plan Commission work plan for further discussion.
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner Britton. Discussion? So the reason I added the G5 is it directly references back to F. It says, please, you need to comply with F. So there was no reason to have it in there.
And I concur, just for the record.
Any further discussion on this item? Okay, hearing none. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, motion passes. So please note that we are requesting to add it to the future work plan. All right. So the final item for potential motions that staff has brought forward is alternative parking regulations, which we can discuss or not.
I'll discuss. If I understand correctly, and thank you for bringing this, I think this was in response to some of our discussion and workshop. So this reflects then a direct alignment with the, it's an emergency ordinance, correct? That is,
It's an interim ordinance. You're talking about the council's.
it's not an emergency? I guess not.
No, there's a difference, but
There is a
it's
difference,
an
isn't there?
interim ordinance, which
Okay.
is sort of like what we did with Boca.
It expires after 1 year.
Okay, I guess that's not the point, but it is, I'm curious about that. Okay, thank you. Just wanted to, I guess what I'll conclude that thought is, I do understand where House Bill 1110 got to. And that was, watching the bill, that was a compromise. That's an easy target to start to pull out and debate from transit stops and definitions of, so forth, and quarter mile, half mile, eighth mile, all this other stuff. So I really was proud of the city when they brought it to a half mile, and I'd like to see us move forward on that.
Do you want to make a motion to that effect?
I think that's what this motion says. I just want to make sure I'm reading it correctly.
Well, the specific language is found in Exhibit H, which
And that's what-
is,
Is it in the packet?
yeah, page 417 of the packet.
Okay, let me just do this properly, and if we can all just take a quick look at that. Page 417?
417.
Okay.
Stop telling me what page numbers I was on, because I was searching.
I got so tired.
Sorry.
I mean, it's only 500 pages to scroll through.
I can't get down there.
I'm still scrolling.
563, but who's counting?
Okay, and then I'm just trusting that, as in the presentation, transit stop was, as you defined it, it's a 15-minute.
15-minute service or better in the peak.
Okay, okay. I'm happy to make the motion. I move to substitute the parking regulations found in SMC 17C.230.130 and Table 17C.230-2 with the alternative parking regulation language found in Exhibit H, which aligns with the interim parking ordinance passed by City Council early this year.
Thank you, Commissioner Byerther.
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner Bank. Discussion.
I'll just say I too was proud to see council take this step, and I think critically for what we're discussing here tonight, while it doesn't prevent people from building additional parking should they want to or should the market demand that, it provides a significant amount of flexibility, and I think that's really what we need to be after with this whole package of code amendments, and so I'm enthusiastically in favor of this motion.
I'd also say I agree, especially as a lot of our city is already built out with a specific type of housing and with existing parking ordinances having been in effect for decades. So this allows for flexibility of additional types of housing to provide for people who may have not had that opportunity in the past.
The one thing I will say is I don't personally think that our zoning in parking should be tied to transit stops under the Transit Authority, but I'm not going to win that battle in the state right now. So I'm happy that it's half a mile, and I'll take that win.
Take the win.
You could just add a, no, I'm not even going to suggest anything. So,
You're on the record.
The only thing I'll say is I tentatively concur with this. I do have some concerns with codifying an interim ordinance only 3 months into its testing. So I don't know of other municipalities within the state that have done this. If anyone has any knowledge of how it's worked, I mean, I'm watching developers right now under the temporary BOCA rules that are building parking in places where they weren't required to do it. So I do see them looking at the market and saying, okay, we need to provide some parking requirements. And so I'm going to support it, even though I do have some concerns because I think we need to move forward. So.
I guess on that note, can I ask a question as to what happens if council allows the interim parking ordinance to expire and doesn't replace it with a similar permanent ordinance? How does that affect, because this is tied to?
Well,
this would be
this would
adopted.
replace it though.
Okay,
Yep.
Permanently.
thank you.
Basically, I think it would just negate the whole intent of the temporary ordinance. It would make it superfluous.
Great.
Any additional discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Hearing none, okay, motion passes. Okay, so all the amendments that staff brought, we've gone through. So what other items for discussion do we have before us? It's a big package.
I can start. And I won't make a motion because I think if we can deliberate under the main motion on the broad topic of design standards. So one approach could be to also say that we've made great progress, that's great work, and maybe put it on hold and given more time, and that's not a delay tactic, but the context I would put out there on that 30,000 level is there is tremendous work on here, especially on development standards, and that was why we're here. We're here to address exclusionary zoning is one major topic, and we're here to enable and encourage more housing. So an incremental step on that, which is not incremental, it's very transformative, but it's happening in other places, it's happening statewide, is to address that first and foremost, that zoning piece under the development standards. I have some questions there too, but let's just stick on the design standards. Overlaying the design standards, I do believe in good design. I come from structural engineering and architecture. This is very important. But I question whether or not we need to go broadly across the whole city. And again, we can look at House Bill 1110 and what the legislative intent was to make sure that regardless of the typology of the structure within these zones, that there's equity on how we approach them. So I do understand trying to find that equity, but moving everything up to a more restrictive is challenging for me. So I'll just make that as a statement. I think there are other ways we can surgically approach that, but I would broadly say, what if we shelve that for now, and would the sky really fall?
And by shelve it for now, you mean not address it?
Strike it.
Oh.
Are we talking design standards?
Strike design standards in those residential neighborhoods for now. So that, I think what I'm saying is strike 17C.11.111.300, which I understand is a big strike, but putting it on the shelf. That wasn't a motion.
Yeah.
Can I make a statement? While I also am concerned about applying design standards to all types of housing, like Commissioner Byweather said, this is the primary function of this is to really move on the zoning and addressing the typology of housing that can be built in our city. And I've leaned more toward this might be one of those things that allows people to be more accepting of things that they are unsure of because they're an unknown in the city, while giving them some sort of surety, and I would be accepting of the design standards as they stand, as they also currently stand for multifamily housing, and address it at a different time so that we can ensure the success of the larger issues at hand here.
Yeah, I guess I'll jump in and address this too, because I think I'm probably kind of somewhere in the middle of the two poles outlined here. In the previous city in which I lived, there were quite a few design standards as well as dimensional standards, but we'll focus on the design standards for right now. And I think they came from a very similar place. They came from a place of community concern over the quality of design and what was ultimately going to end up being built. But what I saw was a proliferation of the same design over and over and over and over and over again. And so very quickly, members of the public went from advocating strongly for design standards to really sort of retaliating against sort of the monotony of what they were seeing in their built environment. And so that's a really, really sticky and difficult line with these design standards in terms of how do you build in enough flexibility. And I want to credit staff for attempting to build in that flexibility, but it's hard. And I guess I tend to come down on, similar to the subdivision requirements and the housing mix, I think this needs more study than it's gotten to date. And I do agree with both of the previous commissioners in saying that this really is about zoning and development standards, and the design standards conversation should have its day and it should be addressed. I just don't know if it's had the thorough vetting, and maybe it has behind the scenes. I don't know that I've seen it to feel comfortable moving forward with it myself.
May I ask a question, Commissioner Bank, of you? So in your experience, and I think I know a little bit of it, was that concerned primarily in large tract development, or was it in infill?
It was almost exclusively in infill, and it was both sort of, small scale, low intensity, I guess, to use the parlance of the day, buildings as well as multifamily. When I hear this facade articulation idea, my eyes sort of roll because, Denver is now filled with multifamily buildings that have facade articulation and colors and things all over the place, and there's 500 of them, and they all look exactly the same, and they all have exactly the same articulation and exactly the same materials and exactly the same colors, because there's sort of a clear, easy path through things. and people tend to find those.
Commissioner?
Addressing that point, I think that's exactly why I would rather leave them in for now so that we could address them as a whole for all of the building types, because right now this would only apply to the middle housing and single unit homes while still requiring those design standards for multifamily and high density. That was my understanding of how they were written.
They're two separate sections.
Right, they're two separate sections, and currently the design standards for multifamily would remain the same, so we would have to strike both of those, which, and I know this is maybe terrible, like, if people think they get what they want and then realize it's not what they thought it was, maybe they'll be more supportive of change and flexibility in the future.
I have a question for Commissioner Banks. So with design standards resulting in just cookie cutter versions, how does the removal of design standards actually change that? Because it seems like, to me, that a developer is going to have their design that they are going to just plop into any site that they find. And so how does it change?
Great question, first of all. In my gut is, and this may be totally unsubstantiated, but one developer may have their prototype, and there's a specific developer in Spokane that I'm thinking of that's done a few of those buildings, and I happen to think they're relatively nice-looking multifamily buildings, but they're the same building in several locations now. But at least the hope is that that may vary developer to developer rather than having sort of a prescriptive set of standards that you have to meet. I mean, obviously, the opposite extreme is full design review where you have to go in front of a committee, and that, I think, in some cases produces a better result, but is hugely onerous and time-consuming, expensive, and all of those things. So, I guess I'm coming back to the default of hoping that two different people have two different approaches rather than asking those two different people or requiring them to conform to the same standard.
I think maybe another, perspective on this, and I didn't necessarily hear it a lot in the process, and I by no means questioning the outreach, but we talk a lot about the Big D developers' input, and that's important. Talk a lot about the neighborhood, so forth, but I feel like we don't often talk about the licensed design professionals' approach. Now, I know they were stakeholders in this process, but as a licensed design professional, I'm a licensed engineer. I have an architecture degree. I practice in this field of designing housing and manufacturing housing, and it's a little bit concerning to me that someone would put these prescriptive requirements on me. Now, that could be relieved if there was a performance pathway, meaning recognizing a licensed professional. An architect has credentials to do this, and we need to acknowledge that. We don't argue with the stormwater engineer that designs a 12-inch pipe. We don't tell them prescriptively the neighborhood tells it shall be a 10-inch pipe. They're the design professional. They have the credentials. They may be wrong, but we have to acknowledge those credentials. So that would be the surgical piece. If we don't want to recommend holding on this for now for more public process, can there be a crafty way to put in that alternative performance pathway, just like we heard today on the water mains. This is how I think about it. You prescriptively put that in unless you have a licensed engineer coming in and actually doing the math and say, no, it's 1 inch. Yeah. I'll put that out there.
Mr. President.
Yes, Commissioner.
I'm going to run right out in the middle of the road. I don't like design standards for housing. I think the market should decide what that looks like. Dimension standards, I'm all for it. Design standards, no. So my leaning is kind of towards, can we just take this whole question and defer it? Strike out whatever we need to strike out and defer it until we have the opportunity as a group to talk about it, because there's a fascinating divergence of opinions here, and I personally would like to have more time to have input on that.
Mr. President.
Commissioner Williams.
I fall into the, in general, I'm not a big fan of design standards either. I would rather have the market. But there's a broader issue, which I think Ryan addressed initially. We want to get these changes adopted. There's been pretty good support and not much pushback from the community for greatly increased, changes to their neighborhoods. And part of that, though, is predicated on them thinking that there's some standards that go with that. You could make a change or two to some of these design standards, but I think from the broader perspective of getting the big picture implemented with these changes, that, okay, you can't have a garage underneath your house, or it can't be too wide, or like the window treatment things, that one maybe goes a little too far, got to have a flower box or a 3-inch thing. I'm kind of like, we could probably live without that section. But I get the garage thing and the 15% of windows and some of the, there's not a long list of things that are highly prescriptive there. So I think, given the feedback that the staff has gotten, that the right thing for the long haul is probably less design standards, more creativity, and let professionals do their job. But I'm sensing in the intermediate term, to get the bigger goal accomplished of these zoning changes allowing a lot more infill and better use of lots, that I'm willing to kind of relax my personal viewpoint on the design standards for right now. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. I would make the caveat that there's a section on the window treatments that if somebody else wanted to propose that we axe that particular section, I would go for that.
Mr. President? can I
Yes,
make a
Commissioner
suggestion?
Shook.
Can we keep what we have, but also make a stipulation that they can design their own as well, and everything has to come and be reviewed before it's accepted? So why can't they have
I think
the?
that is an alternative deviation allowed at this point. On some of the issues, the window treatment specifically is, all of the design standards can technically be questioned, I believe, right?
Yes, so the way the design standards are written, there is a route for somebody who wishes to do something different to get approval. I think the issue would be the amount of time and expense that
Does
would be
cost money,
required.
yeah.
It depends on the level of whether it's a requirement or a presumption.
Mhm. But they would still have the option to hire their own architecture and design their own home or building, and then still bring it to the, and I'm sure if people want to do that, that's fine. They don't mind waiting for an opportunity to speak with the plan director or whoever would make that decision. And in the meantime, the things that are already provided gives others suggestions on what they can do if they don't have any, for example. Or sometimes you can take something and play off it, and it's even better than it was before.
Commissioner Britt?
So out of curiosity, what is the breakdown between the things that are presumption versus the requirements? They're just a litany of requirements?
They're listed there in the code, so I don't have a quick summary available, but.
But to that point, is it possible to turn more of the requirements into presumptions to sort of split the baby, as it were, here, so that we could move forward and there's an easier path? Because the presumptions have less of a, sort of a process to go through. It's less expensive and time-consuming, correct?
That's right. So just as an example, during the workshops, the concerns about the window styling was made, and in response to that, staff did change that from a requirement to a presumption. So on the window, issue specifically, that does have that lower threshold. Basically, they can work with the current planners and ultimately with me as the planning director. And if we feel comfortable that they've met the intent of that section, they can get a waiver just through that process instead of going to the design review board. So I guess what you're suggesting is something similar could happen on other.
Yes.
Okay.
And in fact, I don't know if that means that I'd be in agreement with tabling this for the time being, but in that regard, I too am sort of in favor of not having a whole bunch of, especially, long and drawn out processes for people to have to jump through in order for them to have the housing that they want necessarily. So if there's a way that we could do that, I would feel better about it than simply just doing away with it entirely. Cleans up the process, it shortens it.
Yeah, I don't disagree, and purposely started on the design standard side because there is a departure process that's formally, in here, and I think it's, it is very specific on how you do it, and I understand the pathways, and then there is the opportunity to take it all the way and either ask for, or the planning director can ask the design review board to weigh in on this, and so it is well defined. I think maybe when I was suggesting streamlining that even more was to give the additional performance pathway where you say, if you're licensed and you put a stamp on it, that also needs to count, because it is a very lengthy process, a very costly process to do that, especially on a residence. And one more perspective is, I work in the field of pre-manufactured homes. That means that things are done in a factory, and it is very hard to address jurisdiction by jurisdiction, all these very specific local design guidelines. We feel we do very good design. It's very hard to say Spokane, Seattle, Tacoma. It's a lengthy process. The thing I'll share is that this is being addressed at the state level. If you follow the committee work last year, they made a lot of progress on addressing this particular issue. They backed off on a lot because they had to compromise to get the big wins on the zoning and development. So we're not out of line with what's happening in the state, and what I anticipate will also happen in the next session. I think they'll move these types of issues further. Seattle's already doing it. Seattle is very excited about how they're starting to address some of their very onerous design review. So maybe asking for a little delay on this also is to work with the state and see where the legislature is going to go and help inform that as the second largest city in the state.
I would say, though, if the state decides something that's going to preempt anything that we do here tonight anyway, if it's in contravention of what we're doing.
Yep.
I do have a question for you, though, specifically. Is there anything in here that you've seen that you feel like, actually, maybe this is a loaded question. I didn't mean that to be standoffish. Whenever you see like a requirement specifically, something that you see that you would be better apt to put your stamp of approval on rather than someone else, can you like call out a specific that you've seen?
Yeah, I think, obviously a very strong one I maybe mentioned in workshop is, window, percentage facing the street. Those are fundamental planning and design principles of eyes on the street. I mean, we're all the way back to Jane Jacobs, and I think I've shared I'm heavily influenced by perspectives from the street, from Jan Gale and Danish, modes. So it's like, I do believe in urban design, what that experience is from the street, but I think by saying very prescriptive, what is that window, then it starts to get away from issues of affordability, where a manufacturer might choose to, a certain window type that they can aggregate and do many of. It's a very good window design, but it may or may not meet a specific city's jurisdiction's prescriptive requirements. Now we're away from the benefit of doing good design and bringing it to cost competitive structures. Now, that being said, somebody's going to abuse that. And 95% of the built environment, as I've said, offends me, the design. And I just struggle with that, but I have to.
So I guess the question is, like, I look at some of these design standards, and some of them bother me and others don't. I think some of them are just effectively a given. You know, to me, 15% of, you know, glass on toward the street is good. But I've also seen plenty of architecture that doesn't have that at all. And all you have to do is look at Arc Daily every day, and you see bizarre architecture that is leading design that has like one little tiny window.
But is it the role of the city to be design critics? When there are professionals that do that.
But as you said, what percent of you think is bad design?
I say 95.
I guess so.
I'm a little arrogant.
I mean, I know what you're saying, but at the same time, if there's a point at which that designer gets to walk away from that project and leave it to the owner. Now, sometimes that designer is going to be the owner. But they're not going to have to deal with the long-term ramifications of that project, whereas the city will, and the neighborhood will. I mean, I don't want to be overly prescriptive, but at the same time, I do want to see something, you know, and I love diverse architecture. You know, I walk around my Rockwood neighborhood, and, you know, people are this like, oh, I hate that stuff. It doesn't fit the compatibility of the neighborhood. I think it's great because it stands out and it's unique. And it's, you know, in some cases really nice looking. Other cases I go, I can do without this. But I like that diversity of design. But there are, you know, there has to be, to me, there are some limits on it. And I just don't know where those limits are. I feel like these might be overly prescriptive. So, yeah.
I guess one additional statement I'd make, even in support of the design requirement standards, isn't in the prescriptive requirements, but in the purpose statements that are in there. So although there is an opportunity for deviation from the very specific window treatments that are spelled out in the like select one from this list, the purpose statement is still standing of this is a desired purpose. And although I do not 100% agree with all of the purpose statements, I do think they were made with an intention of providing for the type and compatibility with existing neighborhoods, which a lot of people feel is very important, especially when approached with something that does a building that will otherwise deviate from what they expect to see in their neighborhood. So again, I just, you know, I think there is an opportunity for using those purpose statements and then potentially having an opportunity in the next year or two to have further discussion. By keeping these design standards in, although they are new and unique, they are effectively keeping the status quo of what already exists. They already exist for two-family, they already exist for multifamily, they already exist for attached homes. The only place that they didn't exist was for single-unit homes. And taking time to further address them and to look into the purpose statements and whether or not they should exist for any types of housing in Spokane, I think it warrants more discussion. And striking them at this point from further discussion, I think will be more detrimental than leaving them in for further discussion.
If I can make, oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, to be honest with you, this is all academic if you're not going to make a motion.
Well, I'll make one more statement and then make a motion. I guess the one thing I would ask is, if you look at what the legislative intent of House Bill 1110, why would they put in that requirement that the design standards, there's equity across those building types? They did it for some reason, right? And then if we carved out everything else out of this proposal, all the development standards, everything else, and we're looking at that section alone, can we, as a commission, as a city, argue that creates more housing, creates more equity, and eliminates our exclusionary practices of the past? And I can't defend that.
I just want to say one more thing, because this, I understand what you mean. I'm like I'm 95% with you on this. But we don't live in a vacuum, and these houses are not built in a vacuum. And, you know, because we live in a city next to other individuals, people have always had that neighbor who does something wild to their house that's outlandish, and it actually drops the value of houses around it and things like that. There are good reasons for some design standards, but for the most part, I'm with you. So I guess that's why I'm saying, perhaps if there was still some oversight, we keep them, but we sort of lessen the restrictions on them. I would be more comfortable voting for that than simply striking it all and letting it play out however it's going to play out.
One thing I think we need to be very cognizant of is that the whole reason this is coming into place is because of middle housing. And, you know, I tend to apply these design standards and think about a single unit home, but we also need to think about it, what's it for a 4-unit? What is it for a 6-unit or a larger? You know, there's going to be a natural design, I think, for single-family homes that is going to tend to orient towards the street. When you look at a 4-plex or a 6-plex, that doesn't necessarily become true. And so that can have a dramatic change on any development that occurs, that it might take away some of the, you know, whether it's a licensed architect or engineer or whomever, they could create a product that really is detrimental to the urban space. So that's why I am inclined to keep something. I mean, I'm willing to, like, hey, let's get rid of these window treatments. Or, you know, and I've thought about, say, okay, instead of a presumption, let's make them a consideration. You know, just identify them to people, say, oh, these are some things you might consider, but they're not a requirement. You know, particularly as, you know, small individual unit developers might say, okay, yeah, that's a good idea, let me include that. And it provides a lot more flexibility without actually stripping it out of there. Yes.
Can I just suggest we really ought to have a motion on the table if we're going to continue to debate?
I mean, we are in the general motion still, but yeah, I agree.
Except there's two potential motions here, because there's one that would say, okay, we're going to remove design standards altogether, and then there's others that are a little bit more surgical. So I think we're getting to that point.
Yeah. Would people be happy if we changed some of these to consideration rather than getting rid of them? And they would be there, but also, like was mentioned before, that the purpose would remain? It's just a compromise.
Yeah. Cliff, I don't disagree with that. I think I'm cautious of on the dais surgically unwinding a very complex, you know, web. You know, what the team has put together is multivariable calculus, and so I'd rather say strike it and give more public process, but I also understand it's a little insulting to all the work that was done. If anything, if I'm hearing everyone's kind of interest here, I'd like to propose that we make an exception for a design professional, and that's a good first step to let alternative performance pathway, which is kind of, not kind of, in the US, we are overly prescriptive in all our codes. This is one of our main differences from performance codes in Europe. We can't change that, we're here. Energy codes, everything, and the way we deal with that is we put a performance pathway in there. So I will make a motion to put a performance pathway in there to make an exception to the design standards for a licensed design professional if they seal their design.
I need to ask a clarifying question. Does it have to be seconded first?
Yeah, I think so.
I think so.
I will second to hear.
Thank you, Commissioner
because
Britt.
I want to. I want to understand that a little bit better. So like how does that work out for the process? So we've got two processes, my understanding, depending on if it's prescriptive or required. Now you're sort of interjecting kind of, I don't know if it's a third path or if it's like, I don't understand, like where does it come in sort of to that process?
It would have to be crafted, of course, and we'd be relying on the staff to help us craft this before and bring it to the council, right? But it could look like, and I take any suggestions here, that, you know, an exception to Chapter 17, C, 111, 300, and wherever the administrative pieces are, that if a licensed design professional, that has to be defined. Capital A architecture, there are places in our state code where engineers are allowed to stamp certain size structures and so forth. But that if that's a sealed drawing, that's taken over the counter, and now it can still go through review, right? But it's like my engineering stamp, I put it on a building, and structural goes through the building official. So I don't know that I have all that, but that would be the pathway.
I'm sorry, just again, one more clarifying. So like, once you stamp it, it's done. There is no additional process. That thing can be
I
built.
still have to get a permit, so it still has to go through the pre-development, meeting, the development meeting and so forth. Like, it's still going to go through the process.
But in terms of design, it's open and shut.
If you're a licensed professional, yes.
Okay.
Now, okay, I'll just leave it there.
Well, that was what I was wanting to address was, so like I mentioned before, there are some purpose statements on some of the design standards. I mean, I was just reviewing a few of them. I know we like to pick on the windows a lot, but there are also some that, such as where does the garage hit, where is the entrance? And there are plenty of architects who probably would still sign off on designs that have garages that completely flout the purpose statement of the design standards as they are mentioned here. And if it just takes a couple $1,000s to get an architect to say like, yep, I approve this, design, and then it would effectively be an automatic exclusion to what everyone else is held to.
And I know you don't mean to be offensive, but to a licensed professional, that is, we are credentialed.
And I'm not trying to compare you to the same people who design all of the Taco
defending
Bells.
architects and engineers in general.
But there are a lot of buildings that are technically designed by architects that are cookie cutter, that are prescriptive, that are not what someone would consider high design.
We have to ask ourselves the question, who is more qualified to our neighborhoods, our planners, our design review boards? We have to establish that.
I don't disagree.
Commissioner Neely.
So when I think of the city, back to the design standards writ large, when I think of the city being involved in design standards, my rather demented mind goes back to government trying to decide what's pornography. It's in the eye of the beholder. If a licensed architect can bring a design forward that gets past the planning commission, and they're like, okay, that's fine, we're good with that, I've got no problem with that. In fact, I would prefer that was the case. There are factions in architecture, as there are factions in everything else. The city's got better things to do with their time and our tax money than to be in the fashion business.
But are you proposing that the designs from the architect would be reviewed by?
Oh, it's got to be reviewed.
So at this point, there is no review process, or at least in this proposal, there would be no review process of approval of the design. It would be for all of the other things. It would be for the building coverage and the height and the setbacks, but the specific design parts wouldn't be in review. I just wanted to clarify.
You'd sit in a pre-development meeting, you go around the table and say, yes, we've checked that box, it's sealed from a licensed architect or engineer. Stormwater, is it sealed by Again, stormwater is one of the other pathways here, I think, right? We have prescriptive measures and we say, or stormwater, yeah.
And one other thing. Mr. President, your comment earlier about the house with the one little window, that's yesterday's Craftsman neighborhood. And 50 years from now, they'll be, don't mess with our neighborhood. This is the neighborhood with the one little window. It's true. Again, it comes back to fashion.
Oh, it will be the one on, as a historic home, so,
Yeah,
because
sure.
it's a unique design.
Yeah.
So, I guess my concern, it depends, I don't know. It's tough for me because, yeah, I don't want the government in the process of determining good design. At the same time, you can find an architect that will stamp something. You've said most of the stuff you see is not good design. But do you remove everything and say one stamp replaces that? I can't support that because I think there are some things that are in here within the design standards that are fundamental, as far as pedestrian connectivity and maybe some landscape requirements. There are some things in here that are, to me, are essential, particularly as we move into middle housing and we're going to have connectivity. Are you going to just say, okay, you don't need any walkways if someone stamps it? It could just be dirt. So I can't just turn it over and say no. There's nothing. If an architect or an engineer stamps it and it gets a cursory review by design staff, to me that's coming in with a very high expectation where it's going to be probably more perfunctive, if that's the right word. You're an attorney. It'll probably be a much simpler process than if someone came in as a non-architect and tried to do it. But I still think it needs to go through a review process.
So I'm still kind of on this split the baby kick. What if any of the requirements, like the hardest ones, right, sort of had a reversion back to, like if you stamped it, Commissioner Byerother, one of the requirements, and that somehow puts it back in the realm of prescriptive, right, where it goes through a different process.
Or it goes through a design review process.
Something,
Or
like it goes through...
Administrative, I'm sorry.
Administrative.
Or there are... design
But
review.
like if you funnel it back into the prescriptive process, you just sort of take all of the requirements basically, because you stamped it, right? Like you know what you're talking about, but it still has to be within the realm of... They can say no because it's not in keeping with, it's outlandish or what have you. Because again, my thought is there are some good design standards. I agree there's got to be some sort of oversight. There just has to be. And I'm not going to throw your entire profession under the bus. I, as an attorney, get those jokes all the time. So I completely understand. But also from my perspective, I can't simply allow nothing as well. And so it would either have to be, we got to split the baby, or I've got to go with the rules.
Well, how about as an alternative that, and I think this is maybe what you're saying, is that if it's a licensed architect makes anything that's required, presumptive, and it goes through administrative design review.
Well, and one thing I'll say is we've tried to address this in the past. One thing that's challenging about this conversation is that we're not including the design review board. We're not including, and we tried to create a subcommittee. We did create a subcommittee 3 or 4 years ago to address these kind of things, and we made a little bit of progress, not enough. But it was exactly this kind of discussion of you're going to have to go administer this, but you're not part of the process of the Plan Commission to advise the council on it.
Except you weren't here for the last meeting, but at the last meeting, one of the questions that I had asked was, does the urban design staff have sufficient capacity to handle this load? And the answer was yes. So change in required to presumptive in the case of a licensed architect I guess the question would be to staff, would that would that create an undue burden for staff?
No, I don't think it would add to the burden as far as permitting goes.
It gets you something.
It's the burden on the,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, I would support something like that. I mean, I think for all the reasons, and I think Commissioner Williams, maybe had perhaps the best point of, let's get this thing over the line. But I think a critical piece of all of this is, obviously, this is a more substantive conversation than we're going to get through tonight. And whatever we talk about, whatever we recommend, I think there needs to be a revisiting of this with the Plan Commission. And I think you're right, with the Design Review Board who would administer that. And let's just have the conversation. But we're not going to solve it here tonight. So let's get the best thing we can get.
And include multi-unit,
Yeah.
as well. As, looking at it as a whole for all housing.
Commissioner Shook,
So can we put the design?
can you put your microphone up?
Oh, thank you. Can we put the design team on our work project list?
I wanted to make a note that we do intend to update our multifamily design standards, hopefully in the next year. That will probably be on our work plan. So I think your suggestion, was it you or Jesse, that
I think we're all on board with
that the standards here in the middle housing could be kind of grouped into that effort to review all design standards.
Yes.
So,
comprehensively.
And if we can delay this part, I don't know if that's what you're saying, but if we can delay this part for 6 months and we're comfortable that this can go into effect, all the development standards and so forth, we also get through legislative session and hear what the state is going to discuss, because it is also possible certain things would get preempted.
so my suggestion was not to delay.
I know you were, I know.
Yeah.
I was spitting that.
I'm not supportive of delaying it, because delaying it could mean it could be years.
Yep. So then my motion still stands, and we have to address that. Can we create this alternative pathway until this gets addressed thoroughly?
My question is, if we have a professional stamp this, is that going to make it more affordable?
It depends. That would be my argument. It would depend on the scale of the project, and there's a lot of factors that play into it.
Well, the first thing I would do, just as I've done in the city of Spokane Valley, is go in for pre-development, or, into a review and ask for this design to be substantially permitted across the city. So yes, it could be,
It potentially could.
yeah. That'd be the intent.
Can we call the question?
Yeah, I need to know truly what your motion is, because I don't understand if your motion includes, you talked about a stamp, but does that mean that it goes directly through administrative design review?
I guess
I
I'll-
need clarification on the motion.
I think maybe I'd put the question to our planning director. Do you understand what I mean by saying the licensed design professional has sealed the design? Or how would we word that?
He doesn't vote on it. We do.
I'm asking the technical question.
No, but I have some questions. Would you be proposing to apply this to all of the design standards? So, for example, the sidewalk connectivity in a development is an example where that doesn't actually address the architecture or design of a house. That's more of a site
That's urban design.
layout issue.
That's the realm of a licensed design professional.
Okay.
But it's a good.
And what licensed design professionals are included? Is an engineer allowed to make decisions about design, or would you be proposing that certain design professionals address certain issues? Because if that's the case, we would need to spell out which ones.
I think
address.
the technical piece of what we're talking about here needs to be visited by the staff to go into the RCWs on how the state defines each one of those. What is a capital A architect? And that's where it's defined, where it says things such as a professional engineer can stamp a residential structure up to 10,000 feet, things like that. That we got to go find those references, but that's, when I say that, I know what that means, but If it doesn't, it has to mean that to the planning director.
Well, yeah, I mean, just back to like the site circulation standards. So would that be stamped by an architect, a landscape architect, an engineer, all three?
I think we need to ask our urban design staff and how they interpret urban design, because it's urban design, right?
Right.
So-
I just don't know that we're, I
Landscape
mean, I
architecture.
don't, your motion, I don't think I have enough information to know how we could.
And I'll also ask the question, because I
Implement
don't know, what is it now on residential? Do we have that on sidewalks in place right now?
Meaning the site connectivity and layout.
Yeah, where does that exist?
We don't require a stamp for
Do we have it, do we even, I really don't know, do we have it in RSF zone?
a requirement of that nature. There's not currently a requirement in large part because we don't allow for, or in limited circumstances, things like cottage development. The cottage development code has standards, so that single housing type had a standard applied. But the RSF zone itself didn't really have a standard because
Right.
it was,
So my argument there would be that we're already making the design environment better through that pathway.
yeah, I guess I just don't have enough detail about what design professionals would associate with which design standard.
Well, aren't there some standards? I mean, you're required to have a sidewalk.
Correct. But the question I have is if I want to design a building and I don't really care how it looks, can I hire an engineer to stamp it and say, yep, I think this is great design, and circumvent the requirement to get an architect?
Not if the city says no.
Or, well, that's the thing, is I need to know what the proposal is for what we would put in the code to ensure that we're matching up the right design profession with the
Todd, I
right
like what you're
standard.
saying, but if the city said no, you'd be like, okay. I mean, it's got to work that way.
Yeah, and it does work, how it works, yeah.
So you as the architect would sign off.
Yeah.
It would go to him. He looks at it and goes, no, you can't have that little window up there. The answer's no.
I guess my point is, I think we're trying to define it from the city standpoint. What a design professional is defined by your licensure at the state level.
Right, but we need to have something in our code that tells us which,
But by saying this, a design professional, then that says a capital A architect, and then a capital A architect is defined by RCW, maybe it's a WAC, I don't know, but it's
yeah,
defined.
but I don't think the RCW tells us whether an architect can,
But my licensure at the state level tells me what I can and can't do.
okay, I guess I'm just not familiar enough with that.
I don't know if it says sidewalks. It's your question.
Right, and
Probably
so
not.
that's the thing, is my
Probably does not
concern
say
is
I'm
we
qualified to-
we don't necessarily have the necessary guidance to
Or
be able to be
landscaping.
specific enough.
Commissioner Shook?
Can I ask Todd a question?
Microphone.
Thank you. Are you saying that whatever your design is, and it's like an artist, once they do their work, they sign it and it's official, it's theirs. Are you saying that once you do your design and let's just say it's a window, you create this window and you sign your name and it's going in this particular area, once you've done that, it should be accepted?
And
No
I
matter
regret
what
making
the-
this personal on my.
No, I'm
But
just using it
yes,
as an example.
my-
I'm just trying to understand.
My point is, if there is a structural engineer that's.
No,
as-
just a minute.
Yeah.
Or is that a yes or is that a no? I'm not trying to be,
No, and
mean or
I
anything.
might not
I'm just trying to-
understand, maybe, or I'm
I'm just trying to
interpreting your question
understand.
as,
I'm just trying to see I'm just trying to understand if your work, I realize, or the work of a designer,
design professional.
design professional, once they've created their work, and it's sealed, it doesn't need to go before the review board or the plan commission or anything, it just needs to be accepted and,
No, it's a good question, I
used.
understand, now I understand. No, I mean, at a very basic level, if an architect stamps a drawing with their licensure, that means that they are sealing that this is designed to the intent of the code. whether it's
Right.
life safety code, accessibility, so forth. If it's an engineer to a structural code, that's all we're saying, that within the bounds of your licensure, you are saying this is designed to the intent of the code.
Okay.
So you're taking essentially the responsibility, the liability, and then saying to the city, to get a permit to stamp this, that I designed to the intent of the code. I understand your sidewalk requirements, I designed that to the sidewalk
Okay,
requirements.
so let me ask you another question. So let's just say it's a window, and you design the window, you bring it to me, and you've got your seal on it. I would take this to the city and say, look at my great window, I love it. I want to use it, I want to order 12 more. Can you approve this, or whatever whatever the conversation would need to be? If they say, no, I'm sorry, that won't work, you can't put that there. Are you saying that the homeowner shouldn't need to go to, you want to bypass that step?
No, we're-
Or,
I think the example you're getting into, we would start to talking about appeals and things like that, and maybe that's, that would be the process if something was denied and the design professional didn't feel that was justified, so forth, but maybe we're getting a little deep, but it's a good question, yeah.
is it? I'm trying to
I'm feeling like we need to bring this to a vote. I think it's been an interesting conversation, but I think there's some unknowns about this, moving to this design professional. One is definition, two is further understanding of, well, what about somebody, you give them $200 and they stamp your thing and you get your garage underneath your house kind of thing. And so there's just broader issues there. So I don't know that we're really ready to approve this motion at this time. So I hate to do the call to question thing. I'm not doing that, but I'm saying I think we need to conclude.
I already did that.
Well, you haven't done
I
it
called the
formally.
question 10 minutes ago.
I did not
I
realize
think
that.
we should.
You
It
said.
was in the form of a question, I think.
In the form.
Yes. So, and that prompted me to ask, because I still don't understand the motion. Can you rephrase the motion?
But that's a
Because,
simple restatement, not another 10-minute
yeah,
argument.
right. Can you restate the motion so that we can vote on it?
That the Plan Commission recommends a performance pathway for a licensed design professional to seal the design.
Does it need a second?
No,
It's
he
been
was just
seconded.
restating it. Commissioner Britt,
Unless it didn't sound
I think
consistent.
you did the initial second?
I did.
Okay, so I have,
That concurs with what you thought it was?
okay,
Yes.
so I have,
Yeah,
I
Commissioner
still have
Schiff.
a question,
Okay.
and it'll make it quick. So, what does that mean? We authorize, we have votes say, yes, we vote for this, that we want to have this, we accept the seal. What does that entitle you to? What does that entitle the homeowner? I'm missing it. I'm sorry, I don't understand.
Go ahead.
Well, I kind of concur with you, because to me, it's a general statement without a whole lot of detail behind it. And so I can't vote for it because I don't understand it sufficiently to say that's an alternative pathway that I can support. While I support the idea of architects and that sort of thing, doing design but to me, it's not sufficiently detailed.
Can I take a stab at it based upon what I'm pretty sure you've said? So basically, we have these individuals within the planning department who are not licensed to do exactly what Commissioner Bybrother is licensed to do. And what-
Someone is. Let's take it away from you, but someone is. yeah.
Someone,
Yes.
someone in that profession, and basically he's trying to. Someone in the profession would be able to put their stamp of approval on it and sort of take out that portion of the oversight, I guess, that the city otherwise has in this deal.
Away from the prescriptive pathway, yeah. Just
Away
like
from the prescriptive pathway.
consistent with other codes where if I want to do the energy code, here are 6 different prescriptive bundles I can do, or I can just simply go do the engineering and stamp it.
So only, I guess, in terms of the prescriptive portion, not the required, obviously.
Well, that's probably getting pretty specific. I think it's in general, and I guess I would say just again I don't disagree with your statement, but it's also, let's put it in a different profession. You could go pay a surgeon $200 to cut my finger off. It doesn't mean it's ethical or they should, are a good surgeon or so forth, right? There are other consequences there for doing that, so. Could they? Yes, they could accept the 200.
It's another pathway, basically. It's an involvement.
I guess I agree that we don't have the detail right now to be able to put it into language that could be adopted by city council, and that would be my concern. And that would take more work so that we could specifically word it, and I don't feel as though it's something that the council would be able to make a decision on to pass this ordinance.
Yeah, I think we should call the question, because I think we've exhausted, and that's okay. Thank you all for entertaining it. I think it's an easy future amendment if it's not a recommendation here, and I think it's also an easy preemption at the state level, so.
Can we call the question, please?
I was just about to ask that.
Yes. Just say call the question.
Call the question.
Okay. All in favor of calling the question, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, the question is called. Let's
Vote on the recommended
Yeah.
amendment?
recommended amendment. I'm all in favor of the recommended amendment, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Aye. Any abstaining?
Me.
So we have 1 in favor, 5 opposed, and 2 abstaining. Is that my understanding? Motion fails.
Thank you.
That said, I think it is if we can include that in, as a pathway, I think it's an excellent pathway to consider. We just need more
100%.
meat around it.
100%.
So thank you for bringing it to the table. Oh my God.
Bring your window.
To the window, yeah.
Oh my God.
I'm not an architect, for the record.
Okay. Do we have other motions to consider?
I move that we go home.
Careful, that's official.
We still have to vote on the initial version.
We still have the full motion
It's table,
as
yeah.
amended.
I have one more small one, so it won't be controversial, but if I may. In Boca, there is, I think, a very strong applicability clause in there that says, and maybe I should pull it up. I think I'm going to say it, and then I'm going to find it here. 17G 400 010. And what that says is that these provisions that the council can move forward, well, maybe I better pull it up now that I've said that. Just give me 1 second, I'm sorry. So I'm going to say it again, 17C 400. So we're in the land use standards. Chapter 400 is the Boca provisions, right? And then 010 right away where it explains what they're doing here. So when you go to C1, the first clause, that C1, I'll just read it. In the event of a conflict, the provisions of this chapter supersede the standards and requirements of other sections of Title 17 SMC for residential zones. It goes through RSF, R2, so forth. And then gives an exception for airfields. So I think that's important, that's in there to say this is the most recent decision by the council to make sure that you are allowed to design to these standards. That's the most recent decision, so I'm a little worried when Boca goes away, that clause goes away, and these new provisions wouldn't have that clarification to the authority of those standards. So that would be my motion, is to put that clause in these provisions.
Can you state the SMC number again?
Yes, 17C.400.010, and then section C and then 1. Now, I don't know if the whole chapter C should be in there, but let's just put it out there and then with the understanding, yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
So a comment, I guess, and then a question. The first is, I would see this as unnecessary. The purpose of these permanent changes is to bring the code into, I guess, harmony. The reason that this was included specifically in BOCA is that we didn't try to overwrite or change sections of existing code. We were sort of layering this on top. And so we had to be clear that what we were adding in as this top layer would supersede things that were already in the code. But now that we've done our permanent work, it would be highly unusual to have something, I think, in the code that, the purpose of all of the work that we've done is really to harmonize so that there should not be conflict. And if there is, we will work to resolve it. It's not that a code is perfect or free of conflict, but I guess I'm not sure what the purpose would be. But my question would be, where would that phrase go? Because I'm not really sure how you would apply that broadly to. We've touched so many sections of code. How would you write one sentence to say all this other stuff that we've done now supersedes?
You'd be in your administration, in the introduction, right, of where these apply. So.
Well, but we're making amendments to the whole code, so.
Right. I don't know of all the preemptions that could exist in the city. If there are none, then that's fine. But if there are preemptions to what the intent of these provisions are to create equity across the city, then now if there's other ways to address that and clean those up so there aren't those exceptions that are getting around, loopholes around the intent of this, which is equity and eliminate exclusionary practices, then it's not a concern.
I just, in looking at the specific text of it, it does all apply to things that exist in chapter 17, except for, is there an issue with the whole title and chapter? Was that like an old, non?
Chapters are within titles.
Okay. So I guess to that end, that all of these things should have already been rewritten, so they should be unnecessary. I would have to click through and read all of them, but it does appear as though it doesn't ask for any standards that are outside of what is being dealt with here.
I'm taking a defensive position here, not knowing all the different ways people are going to try to find loopholes around these provisions.
Well, I see, we're not doing anything with 17H as far as engineering standards.
Yeah.
So.
And the environmental standards. Too. That was the only two I was wondering about.
So I guess I'll just say it would be staff's position that there are no conflicts. Now, obviously, like I said, there may be something in the code that we don't realize, but we have addressed any of those potential conflicts, so there shouldn't be a loophole or something, an end run that we've introduced that gives somebody an ability to circumvent the intent of, this is sort of the embodiment of the intent. So.
Commissioner Winger?
It's my understanding that 400 was just added on and we didn't make any other changes. What we're covering today is changes that are permanent, and 400 would go away.
That's correct.
Right.
Correct.
Okay.
So I have a question too. So this would be a recommendation for council to add this particular legal language. Is that right?
I guess Todd would have to.
Or to retain this section of.
Oh, is that the intent of the?
Yeah, because just to make sure I understand. So we want to add this to what, like section 17, where all the changes have been made.
Yeah. So and how that is this code is administered.
Mm-hmm.
That's always like the preamble, whatever you want to call it, right? this is how it's administered. And all these provisions in Chapter 17C, whatever, that are being adopted, then when there's conflict, these provisions supersede the conflict. It's a conflict.
So I guess
Resolution.
I'm wondering where the conflict, like outside of Chapter 17?
No, in Chapter 17. Anything in Chapter, that's what this BOCA provision says, that anything in Chapter 17, do be very clear, these supersede those in a conflict.
Well, yes, I understand. So, because like BOCA was designed to be sort of like a Band-Aid, like, slap it on top of the pre-existing code where we knew for a fact there were going to be conflicts. But usually that language means or stands for that same proposition. When you put it in the preamble of the section that it governs, it almost doesn't make any sense because it's not superseding anything. It's just, either the code is well written in 17 or not. Does that make sense? So I don't know how that language would be beneficial unless it superseded something outside of Chapter 17.
I guess my thought about it is it's something that could be one of the Band-Aid fixes, or paper cuts or whatever we call it, if we run into a future conflict where something in 17H conflicts with BOH that we've passed, and then we can resolve that. And administratively, you guys have resolved things as part of the permitting process and brought forward conflicts for correction. So I would be concerned about injecting this within the code because then a future amendment to 17H, like in engineering standards, couldn't supersede the BOH code because BOH specifically says it can't be superseded.
Just question, did we not pass the clerical adjustments motion allowing city clerk to make clerical adjustments to all sections of Title 17 for the purposes of ensuring consistency with this proposal, including but not limited to yada, yada, yada? Does that cover what you're after there?
But those are clerical. Clerical versus substantive.
Okay, fair.
I need a point of clarification here because what is it that we're suspecting that Chapter 17 is going to come in conflict with that we want it to supersede?
There are going to be pathways that I'm trying to prevent from superseding this in a neighborhood, in a street, whatever level might be, to make it more restrictive than what is allowed in these provisions. These are meant to be citywide standards, so.
So are you looking at individuals that might challenge some element of this in a local development because, this conflicts with 17H, blah, 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 blah?
Yep, there's going to be something and there currently is, that preempts this. And I think it should be citywide. If that's another way to say it, I think this should be citywide.
I'm going to be honest. I feel like we're a little out of our depth right now. That's a legislative decision, and even if we were to make the recommendation, it's a little like we'd be asking them to create a law because that is in fact what this would be. It would be a part of the code at that point.
I guess I'd go back to your question. Is there a specific section that you're concerned about that would not have consistency or?
Yeah, we have the ability, we, the city, have the ability to create overlays that could preempt this.
And that would be legislative intent as well.
But yeah, that would be a legislative act.
I feel like we're a little outside of.
So I get the impression you're talking about like historical districts.
You could create any overlay that does this, and overlays were, but I want that overlay to be the thing that's the most recent to say they're surgically addressing this. Yes.
But that requires a specific legislative action to make that occur. And so that would require intent.
But this is legislative. We're advising the.
But
Preemptive, though.
But the legislative action couldn't override state law, and a lot of this is going to be codified under 1110, right?
So I'm just going to cut in and say this is totally out of scope. I don't think we've, This hasn't really been vetted publicly.
Okay.
So.
Todd, can you read your really simple thing again?
Well, I was just citing, I was just,
No, your actual motion or whatever.
I don't think I did a
didn't make
motion.
He didn't make
Oh,
one.
okay.
So,
Are you going to?
no, not now.
Okay, do we have other discussion points before we vote on the main motion?
I heard it was non-controversial.
Yeah, the main one.
Several hours
Could you restate the motion?
Well, the primary motion is to adopt or recommend that all the changes to 17A, C, D, and G as presented by staff, plus all of our amendments that we have made, be recommended to City Council.
So do we want to pass this as amended?
That's, I mean,
Are-
are we ready to make that vote?
Ready to vote.
Are we ready to vote? Does anyone have an amendment they want to consider?
You have any more on your list?
No. I'm done.
Didn't someone just?
They didn't.
He didn't make
Nope.
the motion.
He didn't make a motion.
He was just
Asking
discussing.
for a clarification on a previous motion.
I will just make a comment that I appreciate the effort on the angle setbacks. I don't agree with them, but it's not worth addressing.
Okay. With that, let's take a vote. Ryan?
Just a second.
See, I'm getting your name right.
Carol has
Twice.
Could you
Oh.
restate it again?
It's to vote on the big package.
Yes, there's
Yeah,
been,
it's right there.
there was a.
That
there was
I
a lot
moved-
to it.
I mean, I
Here.
can't, I can't read all of the recommended.
So,
Just
I
the big
move to
one.
recommend the proposal to all sections entitled 17C and 17D.
Technically, it's A, C, D, and G, but just to, yeah.
Yeah, so it's that primary motion at the top, plus all the amendments that we've passed.
And a bag of chips.
We get a bag of chips, too?
I heard nothing about a bag of chips.
All right, are you ready for a vote, Carol? All right, Ryan, roll call vote, please.
Jesse Bank,
Aye.
Todd Bayerler,
Aye.
Greg Francis,
Aye.
Chris Neely,
Aye.
Ryan Patterson,
Aye.
Carol Shook,
Aye.
Tim Williams,
Aye.
Cliff Winger,
Aye.
Christopher Britt.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Teamwork.
Congratulations to the planning staff,
No kidding.
and thank you, Plan Commission. With that, we are adjourned. We will not meet Friday. Unless you have
Correct.
something.
No meeting Friday.
We will
Please do
not
not
be
come
meeting
Friday.
Friday, and so we will see you in
2 weeks.
2 weeks.
2 weeks.
Thank you, city staff.
Thanks for the pizza.